Hello friends, how are you feeling tonight? I hope your body is relaxed and your mind is calm. If sleep feels far away, this story might help you drift gently into rest. Tonight, we're traveling back to the grand halls and turbulent courts of 16th century England, a time of intrigue, courage, and unforgettable triumphs. We will walk alongside one of history's most remarkable monarchs, Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, whose intelligence, wit, and resilience shaped a nation and inspired generations. As we journey together through the drama of royal plots, daring naval battles, and the quiet strength of a queen who ruled with wisdom and vision, let your mind settle and imagine the flickering candlelight of the Tudor court, the sound of distant trumpets, and the rustle of silk gowns. We will witness the challenges and triumphs of a ruler whose life was as dramatic as it was inspiring, and who became a symbol of courage, strategy, and enduring legacy. So, find your comfortable place, take a slow, deep breath, and allow yourself to be carried through history, where every word will help guide you closer to rest, wonder, and the calm of the night. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps bring more calming stories from history to life. The year was 1533, and the summer air in England carried both promise and unease. In the great palace of Greenwich, a child was born who would one day be called Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the monarch who stood against Spain, who presided over an age of Shakespeare and Drake. Yet on that day in early September, the cries of the infant did not bring rejoicing to every heart, for she was a daughter, not the longed-for son of King Henry VIII and his new queen, Anne Boleyn. The court had held its breath for months, watching the swelling belly of Anne Henry's second wife, the woman for whom the king had broken with Rome, dissolved his first marriage, and split his kingdom from the authority of the Pope. Henry had convinced himself that Anne carried a prince, a son who would secure the Tudor dynasty and silence all doubters. But when the babe was placed in her mother's arms, wrapped in fine linen, it was not a boy, but a girl with fiery red hair, a delicate face and piercing eyes. She was christened Elizabeth, a name that meant, "God is my oath," perhaps already a sign of the destiny that would demand so much from her. The king concealed his disappointment behind pageantry. Elizabeth was given a splendid baptism. The trumpets rang out, nobles filled the chapel, and holy water touched her tiny brow. Yet beneath the ceremonies, whispers stirred. Was this daughter enough to secure the future of England? Would Henry tire of Anne as he had of Queen Catherine before her? Some even muttered that the girl was cursed, born of sin, for was not Anne called by many the concubine? Elizabeth's earliest years were lived in this atmosphere of uncertainty. She was proclaimed princess, yes, but her position was far from secure. The king's love for Anne was passionate, but volatile, a flame that could burn as quickly as it warmed. Elizabeth's nursery was richly supplied. She wore embroidered gowns, slept beneath fine canopies, and was attended by noble ladies. Yet every gift was overshadowed by the question, could a daughter hold the Tudor throne? At court, eyes watched the child with curiosity. Some saw only a girl who might be married off to a foreign prince, a pawn in games of diplomacy. Others, more perceptive, noticed the keen intelligence in her gaze even as she learned her first words. The Spanish ambassador, a shrewd observer, reported that the princess was as beautiful a child as ever I saw. Her red gold hair, so like her father's, gleamed in the candlelight, and her mother declared that she would one day rule hearts, if not kingdoms. But destiny was already sharpening its knives. Anne Boleyn, though queen, was surrounded by enemies. Many in England still loved Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, and despised Anne as the usurper. The birth of a daughter, instead of a son, gave them new ammunition. And the king himself, restless and proud, grew irritable. He wanted heirs, not excuses. For Elizabeth, the palace was both cradle and storm. Servants whispered when they thought she could not hear. Courtiers bowed with forced smiles. weighing whether to pledge loyalty to the little girl or to the forgotten Princess Mary, Catherine's daughter. Even as an infant, Elizabeth's existence was political, her survival uncertain. In her nursery, Anne would sometimes cradle her, murmuring lullabies in French, the language of her youth. Anne's dark eyes, full of both ambition and fear, lingered on the child's face, as if searching for reassurance that all her sacrifices had been worth it. Did she know then how brief her time with Elizabeth would be? Did she sense that her daughter would carry her memory long after the sword had fallen on her slender neck? Henry rarely visited the nursery, but when he did, the atmosphere changed. The king was magnificent, broad-shouldered, red-bearded, a figure of power and majesty. He would lift Elizabeth in his arms, and those around would kneel in silence. Yet even in these moments, a shadow hung over the room. For all his smiles, Henry was already looking to the future, to another son, another chance. Elizabeth, though cherished in those brief hours, was not the answer he craved. Outside the palace walls, the people gossiped. Some pitied the child, others scorned her. In the taverns, men muttered that England had been cursed with queens instead of kings. Women, however, looked at the tiny princess and whispered blessings, perhaps sensing that she carried in her veins not only her father's fierce will, but also the cunning grace of her mother. The year of Elizabeth's birth also marked turbulence across Europe. The Pope had excommunicated Henry, alliances shifted, wars brewed. The world into which she had entered was one of swords and sermons, where faith and politics intertwined, and where every birth could tip the balance of nations. And so Elizabeth began her life, not in peace, not in security, but in a cradle of danger. She was watched by enemies, doubted by her father, and cherished only fleetingly by a mother whose days were numbered. Yet even then, as she grasped at her nurse's finger or gazed at the flicker of torchlight, destiny seemed to stir around her. For though none could yet know it, this fragile child, dismissed by many as a disappointment, would one day stand as the very heart of England, a queen whose reign would shine with glory. But before that, she must survive treachery, imprisonment, and loneliness. Before the crown, there would be shadows. Before the triumph, there would be sorrow. Elizabeth was not yet 3 years old when the world she knew was shattered. Her earliest memories, though blurred by time, must have been of soft hands, the scent of roses in her mother's chamber, the soothing lull of French words whispered against her ear. But those moments would end with sudden violence, for Anne Boleyn's star, which had risen so brilliantly, was about to fall. Anne had been queen for barely 3 years when the whispers began to grow louder. Henry VIII, once consumed with desire for her, was now restless, his fiery temper turned cold. The promised son had not come. After Elizabeth, Anne bore stillborn children, and each disappointment drove a wedge deeper between husband and wife. To Henry, a king whose dynasty was only 1 generation old, the lack of a male heir was more than personal sorrow. It was a threat to the survival of the Tudors. Courtiers watched and waited. Some had never accepted Anne, still loyal to Catherine of Aragon's daughter Mary. Others feared the Queen's sharp tongue and proud manner. Allies slipped away, rivals circled, and the king himself began to look with favour upon another woman. Jane Seymour, gentle and pale, the opposite of Anne's fire. Elizabeth, too young to understand, was carried from chamber to chamber, unaware of the storm gathering around her mother. But the servants whispered, and even in her cradle the child could sense unease in the air, a chill that clung to the palace walls. In the spring of 1536, events moved with terrifying speed. Anne was accused of adultery, of treason, even of witchcraft, wild charges that few truly believed, but which gave Henry the excuse he needed. Elizabeth's mother, once crowned with golden glory, was dragged to the Tower of London. It is said that Anne carried herself with dignity, even in captivity. She prayed, she wrote letters, she declared her innocence. Perhaps she thought Henry would relent, that mercy might yet be found in the heart of the man who had once risked everything for her. But the king's heart had turned to stone. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn walked to the scaffold. She wore a simple grey gown, her hair tucked beneath a white coif. The crowd gathered, murmuring, straining to glimpse the queen who had dared to defy a kingdom. Elizabeth, too young to be present, was kept far away, perhaps playing in a quiet corner of the palace while her mother's fate was sealed. Anne knelt before the French executioner, her last words soft and brave. She spoke not against the king, but for his welfare and for England's. Then the sword fell, swift and sharp, and the life of Elizabeth's mother ended in silence. When the news reached the court, Elizabeth's world changed overnight. She was no longer the cherished daughter of the Queen. She was declared illegitimate, stripped of her title of princess, called instead the Lady Elizabeth. Her mother's name was spoken with disdain, her memory buried beneath accusations of sin and shame. Imagine the confusion of the child, once dressed in silk, carried in triumph, now pushed aside, her place uncertain. She asked for her mother perhaps, but was met with silence or hurried glances. The women who cared for her, loyal to duty, avoided her questions. She learned too soon the meaning of absence, of loss that cannot be named. Yet even in this darkness, seeds were planted in Elizabeth's heart. She would never forget how swiftly fortune could turn, how dangerous it was to trust in love, how fragile was the crown upon a queen's head. These early wounds shaped her into the woman she would become, cautious, calculating, never quick to give her heart, never careless with her throne. Henry moved swiftly to marry Jane Seymour, and soon the court rejoiced again when she bore him a son, Edward. Elizabeth, still a child, watched as her father's eyes lit up at the boy who was everything she was not, male, legitimate, heir to the throne. She smiled when told to smile, curtsied when told to curtsy, but deep within, the knowledge hardened. She was a daughter cast aside, yet she carried Tudor blood, and that blood gave her power no decree could erase. Elizabeth grew in the shadows of her father's shifting affections. Sometimes he showed her kindness, a kiss on the forehead, a gift of jewels or gowns. Other times he ignored her, consumed with his new family. But she learned to adapt. She learned to listen more than speak, to observe the moods of those around her, to survive where her mother had not. In her chambers, tutors began to shape her mind. She absorbed Latin and Greek, music and scripture, the words of poets and philosophers. Even as she grieved for a mother she could barely remember, she grew in wisdom, her mind sharpening like a blade. And though she was now the Lady Elizabeth, a girl of diminished rank, some who looked upon her saw something greater. They saw the fire of her mother's wit and the steel of her father's will. They saw a child who had endured loss, yet carried herself with quiet strength. The fall of Anne Boleyn had been meant to erase her daughter's future. Yet in truth, it had done the opposite. For it taught Elizabeth the first hardest lesson of survival. Trust no one fully, depend upon no single protector, and understand that power comes not from birthright alone, but from the ability to endure. So the little girl, motherless and half forgotten, began to grow into a woman who would one day rule alone. Elizabeth Tudor's earliest years were marked not by the warmth of stability, but by shadows that lengthened across every corridor she walked. She was the daughter of a mother executed for treason, a child whom the king himself had declared illegitimate. Though she remained within the royal household, her status was fragile, precarious, and every gesture of kindness she received was tempered by an undercurrent of caution. By the time she was 4, Elizabeth was already a careful observer. Those who entered her nursery noted her watchful eyes, how she studied faces with a gravity unusual in one so young. She had inherited her father's red gold hair, but there was something sharper in her gaze, something that seemed to probe beyond appearances. Even as a child, she was learning that words could be traps, that affection could vanish overnight, and that survival depended on reading the currents of power. After Anne Boleyn's death, Elizabeth was moved frequently between estates, sometimes kept with her half-sister Mary, sometimes sent to country houses under the care of trusted guardians. These moves were not always gentle shifts. They reflected her father's whims, his shifting marriages, and the volatile politics of the realm. At Hatfield House, at Hunsdon, and later at Chelsea, Elizabeth learned to make a home wherever she was placed, carrying little more than her books, her writing tablets, and the watchful resilience that was becoming her shield. Education became the anchor of her unsettled childhood. Unlike many girls of her time, Elizabeth received a rigorous humanist education, as befitted someone of royal blood, even one deemed illegitimate. Her tutors were among the finest minds of England. William Grindal and later the brilliant Roger Ascham guided her studies with devotion, recognizing in her a rare and eager intelligence. Elizabeth devoured knowledge. She learned Latin as if it were her mother tongue, then mastered Greek, French, and Italian with startling speed. She translated classical works before most children had mastered their catechisms. Cicero, Seneca, Plato. These voices echoed in her chambers, shaping not only her intellect, but also her sense of statecraft, for the ancients spoke often of rulers, virtue, and the fragile dance between power and morality. Music, too, filled her hours. She played the virginals with delicate skill, her fingers dancing across the keys, and sang with a clear, steady voice. To Elizabeth, music was more than art. It was discipline, harmony, a way of weaving order into a world that often seemed chaotic. She also loved to dance, moving with grace, though even in those moments of joy, her tutors remarked on her composure. Never reckless, never careless, always aware of the eyes upon her. Religious instruction was a more dangerous matter. England was torn between the old faith of Rome and the reformed doctrines of the new church. Elizabeth's father demanded obedience to his shifting policies, Catholic one year, Protestant the next. For a child, this could have been confusing, but Elizabeth quickly learned the value of silence. She memorized prayers, recited psalms, and nodded at each lesson, but rarely revealed her own convictions. It was a habit that would serve her well in adulthood: to listen, to conceal, to reveal nothing until the moment demanded it. Her relationship with her siblings reflected the turbulence of the times. Mary, her elder half-sister, carried her own scars, embittered by the fall of her mother Catherine of Aragon. She viewed Elizabeth with suspicion, the living reminder of Anne Boleyn's triumph. Yet there were moments, fleeting but real, when the sisters shared affection. They played together in gardens, embroidered side by side, and in those rare hours seemed simply two girls, not rivals in a dangerous dynasty. Edward, the younger half-brother born to Jane Seymour, was the pearl of their father's eye. Elizabeth, still young herself, doted on him, perhaps recognizing that his presence kept her in relative safety. Henry loved his son fiercely, and while he lived, Elizabeth's life was less threatened, but she understood even then that dynastic love was conditional, that her brother's health or her sister's anger could alter her own fate in an instant. The court itself was both a school and a battlefield. Whenever Elizabeth was summoned to court, she wore her best gowns, silks embroidered with gold thread, pearls at her neck, and jeweled caps. But beneath the finery, she carried caution like armor. She curtsied deeply to her father, careful never to linger too long in his gaze. She spoke with wit when spoken to, but never with arrogance. Courtiers, ever quick to mock or flatter, found themselves disarmed by the girl's sharp answers and graceful composure. Roger Ascham, her tutor, once wrote of her, "She hath attained to such a perfection in Latin, Italian, French, and Spanish, that her like is not to be found. Her mind hath no womanly weakness, her perseverance is equal to that of a man, and her memory long keeps what it quickly picks up." These words, though glowing, were not flattery alone. They were the truth of a child who, though denied legitimacy, refused to be denied greatness of spirit. Yet Elizabeth's childhood was not free of sorrow. In the quiet of her chamber, she must have thought of her mother, whose name could scarcely be spoken at court. Portraits of Anne Boleyn had been destroyed, her memory blackened by official decree. Elizabeth never spoke of her grief, but she kept with her always a small ring, inside which she placed a portrait of her mother. It was her secret, her private rebellion against a world that told her she was born of shame. As she grew older, Elizabeth began to understand the deadly stakes of Tudor politics. Noblemen fell from favour and were executed. Queens were raised high and then cast down. She saw Catherine Howard, her father's fifth wife, carried to the Tower, accused of adultery, and beheaded when Elizabeth was only 8. Again, she learned that crowns sat heavy upon women's brows, and that love was a dangerous bargain in a world of kings. Her own precarious status demanded that she live carefully. At times, she was excluded from court, treated almost as a noble bastard rather than a princess. Yet she endured. She wrote letters in elegant Latin, she embroidered fine tapestries, she studied history and philosophy. Every day was an act of preparation, though she could not yet know for what. There were moments of joy as well. She loved riding, feeling the wind on her face as she galloped across fields, the sense of freedom that came only on horseback. She enjoyed plays and pageants, laughing with abandon when jesters performed. Those who served her often remarked that though her childhood was heavy with loss, she carried within her a lightness, a wit that shone in her rare laughter. Above all, Elizabeth learned patience. She saw how quickly fortunes changed at court, how those who reached too eagerly for power were cut down. She resolved never to be reckless, never to trust too easily. Where others blundered, she would wait. Where others spoke, she would listen. And when her moment came, she would be ready. By her early teens, Elizabeth was already remarkable. Scholars praised her brilliance, nobles marveled at her poise, but she herself remained cautious. She knew she was her father's daughter, a king who could destroy as quickly as he could elevate. She knew she was her mother's child, a queen who had flown too close to the sun. To survive, she must walk between those legacies, never forgetting, never faltering. Her childhood had given her no illusions. She knew the world was cruel, that love was fleeting, and that power was perilous. Yet out of these shadows, a queen was beginning to emerge. A young woman who, even stripped of title and status, carried within her the strength to shape a kingdom. And as the years passed, Elizabeth's brilliance could no longer be hidden. In every book she read, in every language she mastered, in every lesson she absorbed, she was preparing not merely to survive, but to rule. Her time had not yet come, but destiny was watching, biding its hour, and Elizabeth, the child of shadows, was waiting too. The crown upon Elizabeth's head glittered with unmatched authority, yet around her hung a question as heavy as iron, one that shadowed her councils and her court, one that the people whispered in taverns and foreign envoys pressed with restless persistence. Would their young queen marry? Would she bind her kingdom's fate with her own hand, to a man who might strengthen her throne, secure her succession, and bring peace through alliance? Or would she remain unwed, a solitary ruler in a world dominated by men? The air of England in the late 1550s and early 1560s was filled with speculation, expectation, and unease. Elizabeth had been crowned in 1559, and with her youth and beauty came the natural assumption that marriage was not only inevitable, but essential. A monarch, after all, was not simply a private individual, but the living embodiment of a nation's continuity. For centuries, kings and queens had wed not out of love, but out of duty. Duty to secure heirs, to bind kingdoms together, to assure stability in succession. To remain single was not just unusual, it was dangerous. Yet Elizabeth was not like other monarchs, nor had her life been ordinary. Her childhood had shown her how fragile the fortunes of queens could be when bound to men. She had seen her mother, Anne Boleyn, rise as the radiant consort of Henry VIII, only to fall beneath the executioner's axe. She had seen her half-sister, Mary Queen, bind herself to Philip of Spain, only to alienate her subjects and plunge England into political turmoil. Elizabeth remembered the whispers that had circulated during Mary's reign, that the Queen was ruled not by herself, but by her husband, a foreign king whose interests often conflicted with those of England. Such memories sank deeply into Elizabeth's heart and mind. But beyond her personal fears, lay the practical dilemmas. Every suitor came with both promise and peril. To marry a foreign prince meant inviting another power into England's affairs. To marry an English nobleman meant stirring resentment among those left overlooked. And to marry at all meant risking the balance she had begun so carefully to weave in her early reign. Among the suitors who pressed their cause, none shone more brightly in Elizabeth's heart than Robert Dudley, later Earl of Leicester. They had known one another since youth, bound together by shared experiences at court and by the storms of politics under her sister A.S. rule. He was handsome, tall, charismatic, a skilled horseman with a lively wit and a certain daring boldness that matched Elizabeth's own restless spirit. He was, above all, utterly devoted to her, and it was no secret at court that the Queen's eyes followed him with warmth unmatched by any other. But love, even the purest kind, could be poisoned by circumstance. Dudley was married, bound to Amy Robsart, a gentlewoman of respectable family. Though their marriage was not close and their paths rarely crossed, the existence of Amy was an obstacle that Elizabeth could not simply brush aside. To take Dudley as a consort while his wife lived would have been scandal of the gravest kind, a stain upon her reign before it had truly begun. And then, in September of 1560, scandal nearly consumed them both. Amy Robsart was found dead at her home, her neck broken at the foot of a staircase. Was it an accident? Was it suicide? Or was it, as many whispered, murder, committed to clear the path for Dudley's union with the Queen? The truth was never proven, yet suspicion spread like wildfire. Enemies of Elizabeth muttered that she had conspired with Dudley to rid herself of his inconvenient wife. Though no evidence ever touched her directly, the shadow of that death haunted them both. The possibility of marriage between Elizabeth and Dudley, once whispered with excitement by courtiers, now became unthinkable. To wed him would have been to confirm every dark suspicion, to risk her crown and her people's faith in her. Still, suitors came from across Europe. Philip II of Spain himself, widowed after the death of Queen Mary, proposed marriage to Elizabeth, though the memory of his role in her sister's oppressive reign made him an impossible choice. The Archduke Charles of Austria offered himself, bringing with him the potential of alliance with the powerful Habsburg dynasty. Yet Elizabeth hesitated, wary of foreign entanglements. Even Eric XV of Sweden sent flattering letters, describing himself as a devoted admirer, though his distant realm and uncertain temperament made him unsuitable. Every offer required delicate handling. Elizabeth was shrewd enough to understand the value of appearing open to negotiation. For each potential match could be used as leverage in diplomacy. To hint at marriage with Spain could restrain French ambitions. To entertain Austria's advances could encourage better terms with Protestant princes in Germany. To play Sweden against Scotland was another card in her deck. In this way, Elizabeth wielded her unmarried state as a weapon sharper than steel, a bargaining tool that allowed her to keep powerful nations off balance, always hoping, always uncertain, always in need of her favour. Yet her own counsellors were not so easily placated. William Cecil, her trusted advisor, pressed her constantly to make a decision. He argued that without a husband, and more importantly, without an heir, England's future was perilously uncertain. If Elizabeth were to die without issue, who would inherit? The next in line was Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, a Catholic with strong claims to the English throne. To many Protestants, this was a nightmare. They pleaded with Elizabeth to secure her line with children of her own body, to prevent the possibility of a Catholic restoration through Mary. Elizabeth listened, nodded, and gave them nothing. In council, she was measured, promising consideration, never refusing outright, but never committing either. In private, her thoughts were more tangled. She feared childbirth, remembering too vividly the fate of her stepmother Jane Seymour, who died bringing Henry VIII a son, and the agonies of her half-sister Mary, whose phantom pregnancies had ended in humiliation. She feared the loss of power, the surrender of authority to a husband who might seek to govern in her stead. She feared betrayal, as her mother had suffered. So she delayed, evaded, teased, and promised. She allowed portraits to be exchanged with suitors, allowed envoys to write hopeful letters, allowed negotiations to stretch on for months, even years. Yet always, in the end, the answer was the same. The Queen would not wed. Her courtiers began to whisper of her as the Virgin Queen, though in those early years it was more mockery than reverence. They could not yet know that Elizabeth was shaping an identity, crafting a new image that would transcend tradition. By refusing marriage, she declared that she was wed to her kingdom, that her people were her children, that her throne was her partner. It was a bold statement, radical in its defiance of custom. But Elizabeth's charisma, her command of image and pageantry, would make it not only acceptable, but celebrated. At court, the question of her marriage remained a constant undercurrent, an unending topic of speculation. Would she yet relent? Would she choose love, or duty, or neither? The ambassadors scribbled their reports, noting each smile, each word, each glance toward Dudley, or toward some foreign envoy, seeking to unravel the Queen's heart. But if Elizabeth ever revealed her true thoughts, they were known only to her alone. In the Great Hall of Whitehall, where banners of crimson and gold hung, where courtiers in silk and velvet danced to the strains of lutes and viols, Elizabeth moved like the sun itself, dazzling, radiant, untouchable. Suitors circled, ministers pleaded, Europe watched, yet she remained unclaimed. Each refusal strengthened her legend. Each unanswered proposal bound her throne tighter to her own person. By remaining unmarried, she turned what many thought her greatest weakness into her greatest strength. And so, in these crucial early years, Elizabeth I laid the foundation of the myth that would surround her forever. The Virgin Queen, the untouchable monarch, the woman who needed no husband to rule, no man to define her. In her solitude, she carved a place in history that no other could claim. While Elizabeth of England grew ever more firmly into her crown, learning the delicate art of wielding power without yielding to any man, across the northern border, another queen lived in a blaze of controversy, beauty, and ambition. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, was no ordinary rival. She was kin, cousin, and yet also, in the eyes of many, Elizabeth's most dangerous threat. Mary had been born in 1542, the only surviving legitimate child of James V of Scotland. Barely a week old when her father died, she was proclaimed Queen of Scots in her cradle, her life already entangled with destiny. From childhood, her existence had been shaped by the struggle between Catholic and Protestant, between Scotland's independence and England's dominance, between the ancient alliances of Europe and the shifting realities of the Reformation. Unlike Elizabeth, whose youth was shadowed by suspicion, imprisonment, and fear, Mary's early years unfolded amid the grandeur of France. Sent there as a child bride to cement the alliance between Scotland and France, she grew up in the glittering French court, educated in language, poetry, and refinement. She was tall and striking, with auburn hair and luminous skin, her beauty sung by poets and envied by queens. More importantly, she was Catholic, and in the eyes of Rome, her claim to the English throne was far stronger than Elizabeth's, whose legitimacy many still doubted. For Catholics, Elizabeth was the bastard daughter of Anne Boleyn, while Mary, great-granddaughter of Henry VII, was the rightful heir. In 1558, Mary married the Dauphin of France, Francis, and for a brief moment, her destiny seemed greater still. She became Queen of France as well as Scotland, her heralds displaying the arms of England alongside those of her husband. To Elizabeth, this was a declaration of war in all but name, a bold assertion that Mary considered herself the true sovereign of England. But fate turned. In 1560, Francis died suddenly, leaving Mary a widow at only 18. Childless and vulnerable, she returned to Scotland, a land she barely knew, where fierce Protestant lords held sway, and John Knox thundered sermons against her from the pulpit. Knox, the stern reformer, denounced female rulers as monstrous, railing that Mary's Catholic faith was an abomination. Yet Mary, with courage and grace, sought to rule nonetheless, balancing her personal faith with the realities of her divided realm. It was at this moment that Elizabeth and Mary's stories began to intertwine more closely, a rivalry that would stretch for decades. The two queens, cousins bound by Tudor blood, never met in person, though they exchanged letters filled with courtesy, veiled reproach, and a constant undercurrent of mistrust. Elizabeth addressed Mary as "my sister" in letters, but she never recognized her as heir. To Elizabeth, acknowledging Mary's right to succeed her would have been to sign her own death warrant, for plots could then claim legitimacy in seeking Elizabeth's removal. Mary's life in Scotland was far from the secure majesty Elizabeth commanded in England. She was surrounded by ambitious lords, shifting alliances, and constant intrigue. In 1565, her marriage to Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, a handsome young nobleman with Tudor blood of his own, seemed a bold move to strengthen her claim. At first, the union glittered with promise. Darnley was tall, charming, and shared her Catholic faith. But soon, his vanity, arrogance, and drunkenness soured their marriage. He demanded the crown matrimonial, insisting he be made co-sovereign, and when Mary refused, he grew resentful. The birth of their son, James, in 1566, briefly offered hope for stability. Here was the child who would one day inherit not only Scotland, but perhaps England too. Elizabeth herself acknowledged the boy's significance, remarking with a mixture of admiration and unease that the little prince carries both our fortunes. For James embodied the union of Tudor and Stuart, Catholic and Protestant, England and Scotland, if only destiny allowed him to claim both thrones. But Mary's marriage soon plunged into darkness. Darnley's jealousy of David Rizzio, Mary's Italian secretary and close confidant, exploded into violence. In March 1566, while Mary dined with her ladies, Darnley and a band of conspirators burst into the room, dragged Rizzio away, and murdered him in brutal fashion, stabbing him more than 50 times. Mary, heavily pregnant, was forced to witness the horror, her gown spattered with her friend's blood. The act shocked Scotland and Europe alike, revealing the treachery within her own household. Mary, resilient and cunning, survived the ordeal, but her relationship with Darnley was shattered beyond repair. Less than a year later, in February 1567, Darnley was found dead after an explosion at Kirkhope near Edinburgh. His body, curiously unmarked by fire or blast, lay in a nearby orchard, strangled. Suspicion fell heavily on James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a powerful nobleman who soon became Mary's protector, and, scandalously, her new husband. To many in Scotland, this was the final outrage. Whispers spread that Mary herself had conspired with Bothwell to murder her husband. Whether or not she was truly guilty remains one of history's enduring mysteries, but the perception of her guilt proved devastating. Protestant lords rebelled, painting her as an adulteress and a murderer. In June 1567, at Carberry Hill, Mary surrendered to her enemies. She was imprisoned, forced to abdicate in favour of her infant son James, and confined to the bleak island fortress of Loch Leven. Elizabeth watched these events with a mixture of calculation and disquiet. On one hand, her rival was removed from power, stripped of her crown, and disgraced in the eyes of many. On the other, Elizabeth hesitated to rejoice, for the downfall of a fellow queen set a dangerous precedent. If the people could depose Mary, could not Elizabeth's own enemies do the same to her? Elizabeth wrote letters protesting Mary's treatment, insisting that a sovereign queen should not be so humbled by her subjects. But beneath the courtesy lay relief. For the moment, England's throne was safe. Yet Mary was not destined to languish forever in a Scottish prison. With charm, wit, and cunning, she persuaded her captors to aid in her escape. In May 1568, disguised as a laundress, she slipped from Loch Leven and rallied her supporters. Though her forces were defeated at the Battle of Langside, Mary fled across the border into England, throwing herself on Elizabeth's mercy. Here, fate bound the two queens tighter than ever. Mary arrived in England not as an honoured guest, but as a prisoner cloaked in politeness. Elizabeth could not set her free, for Mary's presence in England would embolden Catholics to rally around her as the rightful queen. Nor could she simply send Mary back to Scotland, where bloodshed would erupt anew. And so Mary became a captive guest, lodged in castles and manor houses across England, guarded but treated with courtesy, imprisoned yet allowed a small court of attendants. From this moment, Mary Stuart became both Elizabeth's guest and her gravest danger. Plots would gather around her name, conspiracies would whisper through Catholic Europe, and Elizabeth's throne would forever stand in Mary's shadow. The rivalry of the two queens was no longer distant. It had come into England's heart, into Elizabeth's realm, into the fragile balance she had so carefully built. And though Elizabeth wore her crown with grace, she knew that as long as Mary lived, her reign would never be free of peril. The arrival of Mary, Queen of Scots, on English soil in 1568 created a dilemma unlike any Elizabeth had ever faced. Mary was kin and cousin, a queen by birth and by blood, and a woman of great beauty and charm. Yet she was also a rival claimant to Elizabeth's throne, a Catholic figurehead whose presence in England stirred hopes and conspiracies among those who dreamed of restoring Rome's authority in England. For Elizabeth, the problem was as dangerous as it was delicate. To grant Mary freedom would be to invite rebellion. To return her to Scotland would be to inflame civil war. To send her abroad would give foreign powers a weapon against England. And so Elizabeth chose a middle path, neither execution nor liberty. Mary would remain in England, a guest, whose every step was watched, her every letter scrutinized, her every conversation shadowed by spies. At first, Mary was lodged with noble families, her imprisonment gilded by comfort and courtesy. She resided at Carlisle Castle, then at Bolton, and later at Tutbury, Sheffield and Chartley. Each residence was a cage, though the bars were velvet. She had attendants, fine clothes, musicians, even the luxury of hunting and embroidery. Yet beneath the pageantry, she remained a prisoner, her freedom stripped from her by another queen who claimed sisterhood, but offered only watchful suspicion. Mary, however, was not one to submit quietly. She was clever, eloquent, and charismatic. Even in captivity, she managed to weave intrigue around her. She wrote endless letters in her graceful hand to allies abroad, to Catholic princes, to the Pope, to Spanish ambassadors. She painted herself as a victim of tyranny, a queen unjustly deposed, pleading for rescue. Wherever her words traveled, sympathy followed, and with sympathy came plotting. Elizabeth's advisors, especially William Cecil, warned constantly of the dangers Mary posed. As long as she lives, they argued, she will be the spark that lights the flame of rebellion. And indeed, rebellion soon came. In 1569, the rising of the Northern Earls shook Elizabeth's realm. Powerful Catholic lords in the north of England, including the Earls of Northumberland and Westmoreland, raised their banners, proclaiming their loyalty not to Elizabeth, but to Mary. Their aim was to depose the Protestant queen, to place Mary on England's throne, and to restore the old faith. The rebellion gathered thousands, marching with banners of the 5 wounds of Christ, chanting Catholic prayers as they advanced. They hoped for aid from Spain, from the Pope, from across the seas. But Elizabeth's forces crushed them swiftly. The leaders fled or were executed, and Elizabeth, furious at their treason, ordered brutal reprisals. Hundreds of rebels were hanged in towns and villages, their bodies left as grim warnings. It was Elizabeth's first great test against Catholic conspiracy, and though she prevailed, the danger Mary embodied grew ever clearer. The Pope himself now entered the fray. In 1570, Pius V issued a papal bull, Regnans in Excelsis, excommunicating Elizabeth, declaring her a heretic, and absolving her subjects from obedience to her. The bull was a weapon more powerful than any army, for it gave religious sanction to rebellion. To kill Elizabeth was not only permissible but righteous in the eyes of Rome, and at the center of this storm stood Mary, the Catholic alternative, the woman whom Europe's great Catholic powers, Spain, France, the papacy, might rally behind. Elizabeth, shrewd as ever, did not move hastily. She resisted calls for Mary's execution, insisting that the Scottish Queen was a fellow sovereign, not to be judged like a subject. But her mercy was not kindness, it was strategy. Elizabeth knew that killing Mary outright would risk martyring her, turning her into a holy figure for Catholics. Yet she also knew that keeping Mary alive meant constant vigilance. And so Mary's captivity stretched into years, and years into decades. Her presence became a permanent wound in Elizabeth's reign, a constant source of plots. In 1571, the Ridolfi plot unfolded, a conspiracy to marry Mary to the Duke of Norfolk and place her on England's throne with Spanish support. The plot was uncovered by Elizabeth's growing network of spies, masterminded by the brilliant Francis Walsingham. Norfolk was executed, but Mary was spared once more, though her name was forever linked with treason. Mary, however, never gave up hope. Her letters, often smuggled in the seams of garments or hidden in beer barrels, continued to reach conspirators abroad. She encouraged Philip of Spain. She appealed to the Pope. She whispered of rescue and rebellion. She believed, perhaps rightly, that as long as she lived, she remained a queen. And queens did not surrender. For Elizabeth, the years of Mary's captivity were a constant balancing act. She played a game of appearances, treating Mary with the outward respect due to royalty while ensuring she remained powerless. Elizabeth's courtiers, her parliament, even her ministers pressed her to resolve the question once and for all. "Your Majesty must rid yourself of this danger," they urged. But Elizabeth hesitated, torn between caution and conscience, strategy and sisterhood. The English people themselves were divided. To Protestants, Mary was a viper, a Catholic usurper who threatened all they had gained since the Reformation. To Catholics, she was a beacon of hope, a living symbol that one day the old faith might return in triumph. Elizabeth understood both perceptions, and she used them to her advantage, letting Mary's shadow serve as both warning and shield. But Mary's captivity was not only a matter of politics, it was also personal. Elizabeth and Mary were two women in a man's world, cousins of royal blood, bound by fortune, yet divided by faith and ambition. Their letters, preserved across the years, reveal a strange intimacy. Elizabeth often addressed Mary with warmth, yet always with an undertone of superiority, reminding her cousin who held power. Mary, in turn, alternated between pleading and pride, sometimes begging for freedom, sometimes asserting her claim as Elizabeth's rightful heir. For Elizabeth, the very existence of Mary was a paradox. She was both sister and threat, both victim and conspirator, both kin and rival. Elizabeth could never quite bring herself to spill the blood of a fellow queen, yet she could never risk letting her go. And so, the dance continued, year after year, Elizabeth circling her captive cousin like a wary lioness, knowing that at any moment the cage might be broken and the prey might become the predator. By the mid-1570s, Mary's captivity had become one of the defining features of Elizabeth's reign. Foreign ambassadors spoke of it constantly. Parliament debated it endlessly. Catholic priests whispered her name in hidden chapels. In the countryside, ordinary men and women speculated on her fate, some hoping she would replace Elizabeth, others praying for her downfall. The shadow of Mary Stuart grew long, stretching across every decision Elizabeth made. She could not wed without considering how marriage would alter Mary's prospects. She could not negotiate with France or Spain without accounting for Mary's influence. She could not sleep without knowing that somewhere, in some dark chamber, men plotted in Mary's name. Mary may have been a prisoner in body, but in spirit she was everywhere, in Elizabeth's councils, in her people's hearts, in Europe's intrigues. She was both captive and queen, both powerless and dangerous, both silenced and heard. And as the years passed, Elizabeth knew that this unresolved question could not endure forever. For one day, Mary would force her hand. The years of Mary Stuart's captivity were years of constant tension. An invisible knife pressed against Elizabeth's reign. Though Mary remained under watchful guard, her influence reached far beyond the stone walls of her English prisons. stirring Catholic conspiracies, foreign intrigues, and treachery in England itself. By the mid-1580s, the danger could no longer be ignored. Mary had become a symbol, a rallying point for those who saw Elizabeth's Protestant rule as illegitimate. Across Europe, Catholic powers whispered of her restoration. Spain, the papacy, and France all contemplated how Mary's claim might overturn Elizabeth's throne. Within England, priests secretly ministered to her supporters, and noble families, particularly in the north, entertained dangerous thoughts of rebellion. The English spy network, now sharpened under Francis Walsingham, worked tirelessly to uncover the webs of treachery. But even the most loyal agents could not prevent every plot. One of the earliest serious conspiracies was the Throckmorton Plot of 1583. It was a carefully crafted plan to invade England with the support of Spanish forces, assassinate Elizabeth, and place Mary on the throne. Sir Francis Throckmorton acted as the courier between the conspirators and the Spanish ambassador in London, carrying letters that outlined the plan with chilling precision. Walsingham's intelligence, gathered through a network of double agents and deciphered letters, uncovered the plot before it could reach fruition. Throckmorton was arrested, tortured, and executed. The plot's failure sent a stark warning. Elizabeth's enemies were numerous, patient, and relentless. Elizabeth herself understood the precariousness of her position. She was a Protestant queen in a Europe divided by religion, a woman whose legitimacy was constantly questioned by rivals both near and far. Yet she maintained her composure, her sharp mind navigating each crisis with a rare combination of patience, courage, and subtlety. She convened her council, weighed every report, and carefully considered each option before acting. Execution, imprisonment, negotiation, espionage, all were tools she wielded with strategic precision. But no conspiracy was more dangerous than the Babington Plot of 1586, which would finally seal Mary's fate. Anthony Babington, a young Catholic gentleman, plotted to free Mary, assassinate Elizabeth, and place Mary upon the English throne. Letters were written, coded, and smuggled in and out of Mary's household, but Walsingham's spies intercepted and decoded them. Mary, despite years of captivity, engaged in the correspondence, her pride and ambition perhaps blinding her to the risks. The discovery of the Babington Plot was a turning point. For Elizabeth, the evidence was irrefutable. Mary had been implicated in a conspiracy to murder her cousin and seize the crown. The choice Elizabeth faced was stark: to act decisively and eliminate the threat, or risk her own life and the stability of her realm. Years of restraint, caution, and mercy had culminated in a moment where indecision could be fatal. Elizabeth, deeply aware of the political and religious consequences, wrestled with her conscience. Mary was her cousin, a fellow queen, a prisoner who had endured more than most in her short life. To execute her was to cross a line that Elizabeth had long avoided. Yet Elizabeth also recognized her duty to her people. She could not allow plots, assassination attempts, or foreign intervention to threaten England's future. Her realm depended upon her judgment, and the blood of one queen might save thousands of English lives. Mary was brought to trial at Fotheringhay Castle in October 1586. The charges were severe: conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth, collusion with foreign powers, and treason. The trial was conducted with formality and precision, yet it was clear that the outcome was inevitable. Mary, defiant and proud, faced the court with dignity. She spoke in measured tones, asserting her royal status, her innocence in some matters, and her acceptance of divine will in others. Her eloquence and poise impressed even those who knew she had transgressed, highlighting her strength and intelligence. The evidence against Mary was overwhelming. Letters intercepted and deciphered revealed her active participation in Babington's plot. Her correspondence with foreign powers, her instructions to conspirators, her encouragement of rebellion, all pointed toward guilt. Elizabeth's council urged the Queen to act swiftly. Parliament, aware of the threat Mary posed, pressed for her execution. It was no longer a question of mercy, it was a question of survival. Elizabeth delayed as long as she could, weighing each decision with characteristic care. She questioned her counselors, debated the morality and necessity of execution, and even considered sending Mary back to Scotland for judgment. But the reality was clear. No other action could guarantee the safety of her throne. By early 1587, the decision was made. Mary, Queen of Scots, would die. On February 8, 1587, Mary was executed at Fotheringhay Castle. She ascended the scaffold with courage, her posture regal, her demeanour calm. Witnesses noted her composure, the steady voice with which she spoke her final words, and the dignity that defied the violence of her fate. The executioner struck, and Mary's life ended, but her legend began. Across Europe, she was mourned as a martyr. Among English Catholics, she became a symbol of faith and resistance. And for Elizabeth, the death of her cousin marked both a triumph and a burden, for with Mary gone, Elizabeth's throne was secure, yet the act haunted her conscience and her reputation. Mary's death reshaped the political landscape of England and Europe. Spain, long a rival, saw the execution as a provocation, a challenge to Catholic power. Within England, Protestant dominance was reinforced, yet fears of further plots persisted. Elizabeth's careful strategy of mercy, patience, and measured action had reached its limit. She had navigated intrigue, espionage, and betrayal with remarkable skill. Yet she knew that new dangers would emerge, particularly from abroad, as Spain readied its forces, and Philip II began planning the invasion that would culminate in the Spanish Armada. For Elizabeth, the elimination of Mary Stuart was both a personal and political milestone. It demonstrated her resolve, her capacity to act decisively when the safety of her kingdom demanded it. Yet it was also a reminder of the burdens of queenship. That authority came not merely with ceremony and praise, but with the weight of life and death, of conscience and duty, and of decisions that could reverberate across nations for decades to come. The years of Mary's captivity and plotting had forged Elizabeth into a queen who understood both the power and the peril of her position. She had faced conspiracies, betrayal, and the shadow of death, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resolute. England had survived, and the Protestant faith had endured, thanks in no small part to Elizabeth's shrewd counsel and unwavering judgment. Yet even as she secured her throne, Elizabeth knew that Europe's great powers would not rest, that Spain's ambitions and Catholic plots were far from ended. Mary's death had removed one threat, but it had also stirred the embers of war, diplomacy, and rebellion that would test Elizabeth's leadership in ways she could scarcely imagine. The shadow of danger stretched on, and the Virgin Queen would need every ounce of her cunning, courage, and wisdom to navigate the storms ahead. As the 1580s drew on, Elizabeth's England stood at the crossroads of peril and opportunity. The death of Mary, Queen of Scots, had removed a domestic rival, but it had also inflamed Europe. Philip II of Spain, the most powerful monarch of the age, saw England's Protestant queen not merely as a political opponent, but as an affront to the Catholic faith. The execution of Mary had been a spark. The powder keg was Spain itself, bristling with armies, wealth, and ambition. Elizabeth understood the danger, as no ordinary ruler could. She had spent her early years learning the art of diplomacy, the subtleties of courtly intrigue, and the weight of sovereign responsibility. Every alliance, every trade agreement, every letter sent abroad was measured against the looming presence of Spain. The Armada, Philip's great fleet, was still years from setting sail, but its shadow already darkened English waters, and every Spanish ambassador, every plot in the Netherlands, every whisper from Rome, reminded Elizabeth that war was not a matter of if, but when. In the heart of England, Elizabeth strengthened her navy, investing in ships built for speed and maneuverability, armed with the latest cannon technology. She appointed skilled captains, men like Sir Francis Drake, whose daring raids on Spanish treasure fleets would later earn both fame and infamy. These measures were necessary not just for defense, but for signaling to Philip and his allies that England would not be intimidated. Yet England's position was precarious. Internally, the country was divided by religion. The Protestant majority supported Elizabeth, but Catholics remained a potent undercurrent, some quietly loyal, others ready to conspire. The Pope and the Spanish crown offered both hope and incentive for rebellion. Elizabeth's intelligence network, masterminded by Francis Walsingham, worked tirelessly to uncover plots, intercept letters, and decode secret messages. From within the walls of castles, through spies in the streets of London, and even abroad, the Queen's agents tracked enemies whose designs could destroy her rule. Elizabeth's personal courage and resolve became the foundation upon which England's stability rested. She travelled widely across the country, addressing her people directly, demonstrating her presence, and strengthening loyalty. Her speeches, carefully crafted and delivered with a blend of warmth, authority, and charisma, reassured her subjects while intimidating potential conspirators. One of her most famous lines, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king," would resonate through history, capturing both her defiance and her mastery of perception. Spain's aggression, however, was relentless. The war in the Netherlands, where Spanish forces sought to crush Protestant rebellion, provided Philip with both experience and momentum. England, though not yet formally at war, supported the Dutch rebels with funds, troops, and strategic guidance. English privateers, sanctioned by Elizabeth, attacked Spanish ships laden with treasure from the New World, angering Philip and solidifying his desire for vengeance. Each skirmish, each raid, escalated tension, making war increasingly inevitable. Within her court, Elizabeth faced the challenge of uniting factions who often disagreed on strategy. Advisors like William Cecil urged caution, emphasizing diplomacy and negotiation, while others, like Sir Francis Walsingham, pressed for preemptive strikes against conspirators and the Spanish fleet. Elizabeth navigated these debates with remarkable skill, weighing risk, understanding human nature, and always considering the long-term consequences of each decision. Her ability to blend firmness with patience, charisma with shrewd calculation, ensured that England remained coherent even in times of crisis. Meanwhile, the Queen herself was becoming an icon, not merely of political authority, but of cultural and symbolic power. Portraits depicted her adorned in pearls, jewels, and the regal attire of sovereignty, projecting an image of divine right and unassailable strength. Every mask, ceremony, and public appearance was carefully orchestrated to reinforce her legitimacy, her independence, and her command of the realm. Elizabeth understood that perception mattered as much as power, that fear and respect were often more effective than armies alone. As Spain prepared its armada, intelligence reached Elizabeth that Philip intended to sail a massive fleet to England, carrying tens of thousands of soldiers. The plan was audacious, a combined naval and land invasion aimed at deposing the Protestant Queen and restoring Catholic rule. Elizabeth's counselors debated the wisdom of defensive preparations versus offensive strikes, yet she alone held the final authority. Every ship built, every cannon mounted, every soldier drilled was a testament to her leadership. Elizabeth herself took the threat personally. She visited ports, inspected fleets, and spoke to commanders, showing both confidence and resolve. Her presence inspired loyalty, courage, and determination among the sailors, soldiers, and citizens alike. England, though smaller and less wealthy than Spain, was infused with a spirit of defiance that would prove decisive. The months leading up to the Armada were tense and filled with maneuvering. Elizabeth maintained diplomatic channels even while preparing for war, sending letters to Philip, engaging with France, and securing alliances in the Netherlands and with other Protestant powers. Every step was calculated to delay, distract, and weaken Spain's plans. Her mind was a constant web of strategy, balancing intelligence reports, domestic stability, and the complexities of European diplomacy. In private, Elizabeth understood the personal stakes. Unlike many monarchs, she ruled without a husband, without an heir, and with rivals who had both claim and blood connection to her throne. Each decision carried mortal weight. The wrong move could mean her death, the destruction of England, and the triumph of Catholic Europe over the Protestant world. Yet she bore this burden with the calm, measured courage that history would remember, keeping fear private while projecting assurance publicly. The Spanish threat shaped every aspect of Elizabeth's reign in the 1580s. It influenced her marriages, or rather, her choice to remain single. It determined her foreign policy, it guided her naval strategy, and it defined her public persona. She became not only a ruler, but a symbol of national identity, Protestant resilience, and female authority in a male-dominated world. By the end of the decade, England was prepared. Ships were ready, fortifications strengthened, and leaders drilled. The nation's spirit, embodied in the figure of Elizabeth herself, was unyielding. Spain's armada would come, but England would not yield easily. The stage was set for one of the greatest naval confrontations in history, and Elizabeth, at the center of it all, stood as both strategist and symbol. The Queen's resolve, her patience, her intelligence, and her unwavering authority ensured that when the storm came, both literal and political, England would face it not as a vulnerable kingdom, but as a nation united under a monarch who had learned, through decades of intrigue, plots, and peril, that courage, wisdom, and perception could turn even the greatest threat into an opportunity for triumph. By 1588, the shadow that Philip II of Spain had cast over England for decades finally began to take tangible form. The Spanish Armada, a massive fleet of over 130 ships carrying some 30,000 men, was preparing to sail from the ports of northern Spain, destined to invade England, overthrow Elizabeth, and restore Catholic rule. For Elizabeth, the threat was unprecedented, a foreign invasion of monumental scale, a test of her authority, and a challenge to the very survival of the Protestant kingdom she had nurtured for decades. The months leading up to the Armada were tense beyond measure. Elizabeth moved through her court with calm authority, even as the fleet gathered thousands of miles away, plotting destruction. She inspected forts along the English coast, ensuring that artillery was ready, that militias were drilled, and that communications between towns and commanders were swift and reliable. Every village along the southern and eastern coasts was placed on alert, every harbour monitored, every Englishman instructed to be vigilant. Elizabeth understood the psychological aspect of leadership as well as the military. She travelled to Tilbury in Essex in the summer, appearing before her troops in full regalia, a queen in armour of silver and steel. It was not a heavy suit meant for battle, but a symbol of resolve, courage, and unity. Speaking to the assembled soldiers, Elizabeth reminded them of their duty, of the strength of England, and of the divine protection she believed had guided her reign. Her words were both strategic and inspirational. She was a monarch who could command not only obedience, but loyalty, devotion, and courage. Meanwhile, Francis Walsingham's intelligence network worked feverishly to uncover Spain's plans. Intercepted letters revealed details of the Armada's size, its route, its intended rendezvous with land forces in the Netherlands, and its ultimate goal, the conquest of England. Walsingham's agents discovered treachery within England as well, uncovering conspiracies among Catholic sympathizers who hoped to facilitate Spanish landings. Every plot that was uncovered was crushed, every sympathizer arrested, and every piece of intelligence meticulously analyzed by the Queen and her council. Elizabeth also coordinated with her naval commanders, men like Lord Howard of Effingham and Sir Francis Drake. Drake, daring and unconventional, advocated for preemptive strikes against the Spanish fleet in harbours along the coast of Spain, disrupting supplies and morale before the invasion could reach England. Elizabeth approved these aggressive tactics, understanding that England's smaller, more manoeuvrable ships would have to use speed, artillery, and cunning, rather than sheer numbers to counter Spain's massive galleons. As the Armada finally set sail in July 1588, the English people watched anxiously. News of the fleet's departure spread quickly, and prayers, sermons, and patriotic proclamations filled churches and town squares alike. The storm clouds above the English Channel mirrored the tension in the hearts of men and women alike. Elizabeth's leadership during this time was remarkable. Not only did she prepare for war, but she also maintained the morale and loyalty of her people. Her presence was a constant reassurance, a a symbol that their queen would not flee, would not falter, and would meet danger with courage equal to their own. The English navy, smaller but more agile, took to the sea to confront the Armada. Commanders employed new tactics, including line-of-battle formations, fireships to break enemy cohesion, and careful coordination of long-range cannon fire. The Spanish ships, designed to carry troops for invasion, were less maneuverable and more vulnerable to the quick, disciplined English vessels. Over the course of several days, the Channel became a theatre of constant engagement, cannon fire echoing across the waves, smoke and mist mingling in a haze of conflict. Elizabeth's role extended beyond the battlefield. She oversaw logistics, ensured that reinforcements and supplies were distributed, and maintained communication with commanders. Letters from the front detailed the ongoing skirmishes, the damage to Spanish vessels, and the heroic actions of English sailors. Elizabeth, understanding the power of perception, ensured that these reports were shared widely, bolstering national morale and reinforcing the image of a monarch who guided her kingdom even in the face of overwhelming threat. Then came the decisive moments of August 1588. The Armada, battered by storms and harried by relentless English attacks, attempted to regroup along the coast of Scotland and Ireland, but nature and strategy conspired against Philip. Many ships were wrecked on rocky shores, men drowned, and supplies lost. England's fleet pursued, striking where the Spanish forces were weakest, employing speed, artillery, and cunning to devastating effect. The English people watched from cliffs and harbours, witnessing the triumph of skill, courage, and resolve over sheer size. Elizabeth I's leadership during the Armada crisis cemented her reputation as one of history's most remarkable sovereigns. She had faced the threat of invasion, the weight of European opposition, and the ever-present danger of rebellion at home. Yet she had maintained composure, authority, and wisdom throughout. Her speeches inspired courage, her strategy ensured victory, and her presence unified a kingdom that might otherwise have succumbed to fear. In the aftermath, England celebrated. Churches rang with bells, towns erupted with jubilation, and the Queen herself received the news of victory with her characteristic mixture of pride and poise. Yet Elizabeth knew that triumph did not erase danger. Spain remained a threat, Europe remained divided, and her own health and longevity were uncertain. The Armada had tested her rule, but it had also revealed her capacity to lead, inspire, and protect. The defeat of the Armada became more than a military victory. It was a symbol of Elizabethan England itself. It represented the resilience of a nation under a strong and intelligent monarch, the triumph of strategy over size, and the affirmation that a woman could rule a great kingdom with wisdom, courage, and authority equal to any man. For Elizabeth, the victory was not merely tactical, but personal, a validation of decades of careful governance, courage in the face of conspiracy, and unwavering commitment to her people and her faith. By the end of 1588, Elizabeth had emerged from the crisis stronger than ever. Her throne was secure, her people loyal, and her legend growing. Yet she remained vigilant. Spain's threat had been delayed, not eliminated. Internal conspiracies, religious divisions, and European ambitions still simmered. Elizabeth understood that sovereignty required constant vigilance, that peace was never permanent, and that the lessons of the Armada, preparation, intelligence, and resolve would guide her in the years to come. With the defeat of the Spanish Armada behind her, Elizabeth thus entered a period of relative stability, yet the daily intricacies of ruling a kingdom, managing a court, and navigating personal relationships remained as demanding as any battlefield. England, invigorated by military triumph, was now a nation of confidence and prosperity, and the Queen's court became a centre of culture, politics, and intrigue. Elizabeth's court was a spectacle of pageantry, elegance, and subtle diplomacy. Courtiers, nobles, and foreign ambassadors navigated a world where favour with the Queen could determine fortunes, marriages, and the fate of estates. Masks, feasts, and theatrical performances were not merely entertainment. They were displays of loyalty, status, and intelligence. Costumes were elaborate, embroidered with pearls and gold thread. halls were decorated with tapestries depicting classical scenes or England's victories. Music filled corridors, from lutes and virginals to orchestras for grand banquets. Every gathering was a lesson in political perception. Among the most significant figures in Elizabeth's court was Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Their relationship, complex and often the subject of speculation, combined friendship, loyalty, and a bond tinged with potential romance. Dudley had been a companion since Elizabeth's youth, a trusted advisor whose ambitions were tempered by devotion to the Queen. While Elizabeth never married, her connection with Dudley was both deeply personal and politically advantageous, providing companionship, counsel, and the appearance of stability within the court. Yet Elizabeth's court was also a theatre of tension and rivalry. Noble families competed for her attention, influence, and patronage, aware that favour could bring wealth, land, and titles, while disfavour could mean exile, disgrace, or imprisonment. Diplomats from France, Spain, and the Netherlands observed carefully, reporting on alliances, loyalties, and courtly undercurrents. Elizabeth navigated these complexities with unmatched skill, rewarding loyalty, punishing deceit, and maintaining her authority while projecting charm and intelligence. The Queen's daily life was regimented, a balance of ceremony, governance, and personal reflection. Mornings began with audiences, petitions, and correspondence from foreign rulers or domestic subjects. Afternoons were devoted to council meetings, reviewing intelligence, and deliberating on matters of state, from taxation to naval defense, from trade disputes to religious policy. Evenings often included performances, banquets, or walks through the gardens of Whitehall or Greenwich, where Elizabeth could observe her courtiers, her people, and the rituals that sustained her authority. Elizabeth herself became a living symbol of England. Her image, immortalized in countless portraits by painters such as Nicholas Hilliard, presented her as eternal, commanding, and majestic. Pearls adorned her hair and gown, a symbol of purity and resilience. Intricate ruffs framed her face, emphasizing poise and elegance. The jeweled Tudor rose embroidered on her attire reminded all of the dynasty she represented. These images were more than vanity. They were tools of perception, reinforcing her power across England and abroad. Despite the grandeur and ceremony, Elizabeth's personal life was marked by solitude. She remained unmarried, a choice shaped by political calculation, personal experience, and the burdens of her role. Marriage could have brought alliances, but also risked subjugation. A husband could wield power that threatened her sovereignty. She understood the value of independence and wielded it to maintain authority. Yet solitude did not mean absence of emotion. Letters, confidences, and private moments reveal a queen who experienced affection, disappointment, longing, and even sorrow. She valued loyalty, feared betrayal, and treasured companionship, as seen in her enduring relationship with Dudley. Elizabeth's reign during these years was also defined by cultural flowering. Literature, theatre, and the arts thrived under her patronage. Playwrights, such as Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare, began to transform English drama, writing works that celebrated history, tragedy, and human complexity. Music and poetry flourished, with compositions celebrating the Queen, the court, and national triumphs. Elizabeth herself was literate, multilingual, and intellectually curious. She read extensively in Latin, French, and Italian, drawing inspiration from classical authors and contemporary thinkers alike. Her court was a centre of Renaissance thought in England. Yet behind the splendour, Elizabeth remained vigilant. Foreign threats persisted, particularly from Spain, and Catholic plots continued to simmer. Internal religious tensions required careful management. Enforcement of Protestant conformity was balanced with pragmatism to avoid rebellion while maintaining faith-based authority. The Queen's intelligence network, now well established, uncovered plots before they matured, ensuring that England remained secure while she focused on governance and diplomacy. Elizabeth's ability to combine personal charisma with political acumen became legendary. She knew the power of image, the necessity of decisiveness, and the influence of patience. Her speeches, delivered in Parliament, on public occasions, or to her troops, were carefully crafted to inspire loyalty, reinforce legitimacy, and project confidence. Her decisions, even when controversial, reflected a long-term vision that balanced pragmatism, morality, and the survival of her kingdom. As Elizabeth aged, her image became increasingly symbolic. She remained the Virgin Queen, a figure of purity, authority, and national identity. Celebrations of her reign included festivals, masques, and state occasions that glorified England and underscored her enduring presence. Her legacy was being forged not merely in policy or military victory, but in the hearts and minds of her people, in the poetry and theatre of the age, and in the diplomacy that secured her realm. Yet Elizabeth never ceased to face the burdens of sovereignty. Decisions that affected life and death, wealth and poverty, rebellion and loyalty weighed heavily. Her personal relationships, though carefully managed, could never fully alleviate the solitude inherent in absolute power. The court's glittering ceremonies could not erase the ever-present threat of conspiracy or the necessity of unwavering vigilance. In these years, Elizabeth epitomized the balance between public authority and private emotion, between ceremonial splendor and practical governance, between vigilance and inspiration. She ruled a nation that celebrated her, depended upon her, and feared the consequences of her absence. Her reign had become a testament to endurance, intelligence, and the extraordinary capacity of a single monarch to shape history. The events of Elizabeth's later court, her complex relationships, and the flourishing of culture set the stage for England's enduring prominence. Her court was a microcosm of her reign itself. Disciplined yet vibrant, strategic yet human, ceremonial yet practical. Every masque, every audience, every speech was a reminder of her authority, her wisdom, and the extraordinary life of the Virgin Queen. Elizabeth's court was no longer merely a setting. It had become a symbol of the Elizabethan age, a period in which art, politics, diplomacy, and personal courage coalesced under a queen whose vision, intellect, and authority ensured that England would endure, prosper, and inspire generations to come. As Elizabeth I entered the later decades of her reign, the shadow of time became increasingly tangible. The queen who had triumphed over conspiracies, foreign threats, and religious unrest now faced a challenge more subtle yet profoundly pressing: the question of succession. Unlike kings who could rely on sons to inherit their throne, Elizabeth had no children, and the absence of an heir cast a long, uneasy shadow over England. From early in her reign, the matter of marriage and succession had been a delicate balance between politics and personal choice. Suitors came and went, foreign princes, English nobles, and distant cousins, all evaluated not merely for affection, but for their ability to strengthen England and secure Protestant continuity. Elizabeth weighed each prospect with care, knowing that a marriage could alter the power of the realm, potentially shift alliances, and either stabilize or endanger her rule. Yet she never yielded. She remained the Virgin Queen, the symbol of a nation, a ruler whose sovereignty was hers alone. By the 1590s, whispers and debates regarding succession had intensified. Advisors, diplomats, and foreign powers speculated endlessly. Some urged Elizabeth to name an heir to prevent civil unrest. Others warned that revealing any preference could ignite courtly factions and foreign interference. Elizabeth, as ever, maintained her composure, never committing herself publicly while navigating these treacherous waters privately. Her letters reveal a careful mind, weighing the merits of candidates, anticipating the ambitions of factions, and recognizing that every choice carried consequences not just for England, but for the entire European balance of power. At court, tensions grew as nobles and advisors positioned themselves and their allies. Figures like Robert Cecil, William's son, and the eventual architect of Elizabeth's succession plan maneuvered subtly to consolidate influence. The Queen observed with patience, noting alliances, rivalries, and loyalties. Her ability to understand human nature, ambition, fear, loyalty, and vanity allowed her to maintain control even in a court rife with intrigue. Elizabeth had long perfected the art of perception, knowing that appearances often mattered as much as actions. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's personal reflection deepened. She spent more time in private, considering her legacy and the future of her nation. She pondered the burdens she had carried, the lives she had judged, the plots she had thwarted, the wars she had prevented or won, and the solitary weight of sovereignty. Though celebrated publicly, she felt the isolation of absolute power, the loneliness of decisions that affected millions, and the unrelenting pressure of mortality. In her letters and confidences, she occasionally expressed wistful contemplation of the life she might have led: a marriage, a family, a life unburdened by the crown. Yet she also recognized the unparalleled opportunity and responsibility of her position, and she accepted it with a measured dignity. The foreign landscape added urgency. James VI of Scotland, son of Mary Stuart, represented both a potential successor and a delicate political question. Catholic powers, still seeking influence, eyed him warily, while English Protestants feared the return of Scottish rule under a monarch whose heritage was intertwined with Catholicism. Elizabeth maintained a cautious watch over James, ensuring that England's interests would not be compromised while considering the long-term implications of his eventual succession. The delicate diplomacy required subtlety. She had to acknowledge James's claim without emboldening Catholic factions or provoking foreign powers. Elizabeth's health, though still robust for her age, was another private concern. The demands of court, governance, and diplomacy weighed heavily, and she increasingly relied on trusted advisors to manage the daily operations of state. Yet she remained ever present in matters of significance, military, religious, or political, ensuring that her authority was unmistakable. Elizabeth's presence alone was a stabilizing force, her intellect and charisma sustaining the loyalty and cohesion of her realm. Religion continued to shape her decisions. England's Protestant establishment required protection from Catholic resurgence, while enforcement of conformity had to be balanced against the risk of rebellion. Elizabeth's policies were pragmatic, firm yet moderate, strategic yet compassionate where possible. She had learned from decades of intrigue, from plots that threatened her life, and from the complexities of European diplomacy. Her religious settlement, her management of Catholic sympathizers, and her calculated tolerance ensured the survival and relative unity of her kingdom. Despite these pressures, Elizabeth remained a cultural icon. The arts flourished under her reign, reflecting the vitality and sophistication of Elizabethan England. Plays, poetry, and music thrived, celebrating history, virtue, and the majesty of the monarchy. Portraiture captured her likeness in eternal grandeur, and her image, always poised, elegant, and commanding, reinforced both the authority of the crown and the enduring allure of the Virgin Queen. Elizabeth understood the power of representation. To project stability, wisdom, and legitimacy was as critical as the decisions she made behind closed doors. By the final years of her reign, Elizabeth's reflections on succession were informed by experience, prudence, and insight. She recognized that her life's work, the preservation of England's independence, the triumph over rebellion and foreign threat, the fostering of culture and governance, needed continuity beyond her own years. She maneuvered cautiously, ensuring that her death would not precipitate chaos, that her legacy would endure, and that the nation she had guided through storms, conspiracies, and wars would survive intact. Elizabeth's reign had always been a balance between public duty and private feeling, between spectacle and strategy, between vulnerability and authority. The succession question epitomized this duality. It was a matter of state, yet deeply personal, a challenge of diplomacy, intelligence, and moral judgment, a test of patience, courage, and foresight. She faced it, as she faced every challenge, with resolve, wisdom, and an unflinching commitment to her country. In these years, Elizabeth became not merely a monarch, but a symbol of endurance and prudence. Her people saw her as a figure of authority and protection, Foreign powers recognized her intellect and cunning, and history would remember her as a queen who navigated the most intricate and perilous issues of sovereignty with a blend of firmness, empathy, and strategic brilliance. The question of succession, which could have destabilized lesser monarchs, instead became a testament to Elizabeth's extraordinary skill, shaping the final chapters of a reign that had already defined an era. As the final years of Elizabeth IV's reign unfolded, England entered a period of reflection and anticipation. The Queen, who had survived assassination plots, foreign threats, and decades of courtly intrigue, now faced the quiet inevitability of time. Though her spirit remained indomitable and her intellect sharp, Elizabeth felt the subtle weight of age pressing upon her, a reminder that even the most resilient sovereign must eventually yield to mortality. The court continued its rituals and pageantry, yet beneath the glittering surface, a solemn awareness pervaded. Elizabeth's appearance in public, still regal, adorned with pearls and rich silks, projected unwavering authority. Yet courtiers whispered among themselves about the Queen's health, her vigor, and the uncharted future of the Tudor throne. For decades, she had been the axis around which England turned. Now, the realm braced for the moment when that axis might falter. Elizabeth's daily life remained a mixture of governance, council, and ceremonial splendor. Audiences with ministers, ambassadors, and nobles continued, though increasingly she delegated routine matters to trusted advisors such as Robert Cecil and William Knollys. Even so, Elizabeth's mind remained fully engaged in affairs of state. Letters, intelligence reports, and political correspondence filled her days, and every decision, whether about taxation, foreign diplomacy, or naval readiness, was meticulously considered. The weight of responsibility never diminished. Religion continued to be a delicate matter. The Protestant settlement she had established faced both internal and external pressures. Catholics remained present, though their influence had waned following the suppression of plots and the decisive action against Mary, Queen of Scots. Elizabeth enforced her religious policies with pragmatism, ensuring compliance while avoiding unnecessary provocation. Her understanding of human nature and political nuance allowed her to maintain stability in a kingdom that could have fractured under a less astute ruler. In these years, Elizabeth increasingly reflected upon her life and legacy. Her thoughts often turned inward, to the choices she had made, the risks she had taken, and the burdens she had borne alone. She had ruled as a woman in a world dominated by men, navigating suspicion, ambition, and prejudice. She had preserved the Protestant faith in England, defied the might of Spain, and led her nation to triumph in battles both military and political. Yet she understood that her most enduring legacy would not be the campaigns she commanded, but the stability and identity she had instilled in her realm. The question of succession remained ever present. James VI of Scotland, son of Mary Stuart, was acknowledged as a probable heir, yet Elizabeth had not formally designated him. This ambiguity preserved her authority, preventing factions from consolidating power prematurely, but it also prolonged uncertainty. Elizabeth understood the delicacy of the situation. A formal declaration could embolden enemies or provoke unrest, yet failure to plan could endanger England after her death. In this balance between prudence and necessity, Elizabeth demonstrated her enduring strategic acumen. Elizabeth's personal solitude became more pronounced in her later years. Though surrounded by attendants, advisors, and courtiers, she lived largely without intimate companionship. Her enduring affection for Robert Dudley had ended with his death in 1588, leaving her with memories of loyalty, love, and loss. The Virgin Queen's relationships had always been constrained by duty. Her devotion to the crown had outweighed personal desire, yet she carried the echoes of emotion in quiet moments of reflection. Her private chambers offered respite, a space for contemplation, prayer, and reading, far from the ceremonies and intrigue of Whitehall. Culture and intellectual life continued to flourish under Elizabeth's patronage. The Elizabethan age, vibrant with literature, theatre, and music, reflected her influence and the stability she had maintained. Playwrights like William Shakespeare and Ben Jonson explored human nature, power, and morality in ways that mirrored the Queen's own experiences. Music and art celebrated the splendor of the court and the triumphs of the nation. Elizabeth herself remained an emblem of sophistication and intellect, fluent in multiple languages and a patron of learning. Her court symbolized the Renaissance ideals of reason, beauty, and political acumen. Yet Elizabeth never abandoned vigilance. Foreign policy remained delicate. Spain, although diminished after the Armada's failure, continued to plot, and the European balance of power remained fragile. Ireland simmered with rebellion, and domestic dissent, though minor compared to earlier decades, required attention. Every message, every envoy, every intelligence report was scrutinized with the care of a monarch who knew that even a moment's lapse could have catastrophic consequences. Her reign had been defined by foresight, and she would not relinquish that quality, even in her final years. As her life approached its end, Elizabeth reflected upon mortality, power, and the passage of time. She had witnessed the deaths of contemporaries, the rise and fall of alliances, and the relentless flow of history beyond her control. She understood that her authority was finite, yet the influence she had exerted, the legacy she had shaped, and the kingdom she had preserved would endure. In private prayers and quiet contemplation, she reconciled herself with the certainty that her reign would end, but England's story would continue, shaped indelibly by her hand. Elizabeth's final appearances were marked by dignity and ceremonial brilliance. She continued to hold audiences, greet foreign dignitaries, and preside over courtly events, projecting the image of stability and continuity. Her portraits from this period depict a queen aware of time's toll, lines upon her face, a measured gaze, but also a monarch whose authority and presence remained unassailable. She embodied the endurance of the Tudor crown, the triumph of intellect and strategy over adversity, and the resilience of England itself. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth I passed away at Richmond Palace. She died without naming an heir, yet the transition of power was remarkably peaceful. James VI of Scotland, her distant cousin and son of Mary Stuart, succeeded her as James I of England, uniting the crowns. Elizabeth's death marked the end of the Tudor dynasty, yet her influence, her achievements, and her legacy would shape the course of English history for centuries. Elizabeth I had faced conspiracies, assassination plots, foreign invasions, and domestic unrest. She had ruled a kingdom divided by religion, threatened by powerful enemies, and constrained by the prejudices of her age. Through it all, she remained resolute, intelligent, and unyielding, guiding England to stability, prosperity, and international prominence. Her reign exemplified the delicate balance of authority, wisdom, and human emotion, demonstrating that true leadership demands both courage and foresight. In death, Elizabeth became legend. She was remembered as the Virgin Queen, the warrior monarch, the patron of arts and letters, and the embodiment of Elizabethan England. Her legacy endured not merely in the victories she won, the plots she foiled, or the culture she fostered, but in the inspiration she provided to generations of rulers, thinkers, and citizens alike. Elizabeth I's life was a testament to the extraordinary capacity of a single human being to shape history through intellect, courage, and unwavering commitment to the realm. Elizabeth I's death in 1603 marked the close of an era, yet her influence on England and on the wider world persisted far beyond her lifetime. The Virgin Queen, who had faced conspiracies, foreign threats, and the ceaseless burdens of sovereignty, left behind a nation stronger, more confident, and increasingly distinct in its identity. Her reign, stretching over 4 decades, had defined not only politics and religion, but also culture, diplomacy, and national pride. The most immediate impact of Elizabeth's legacy was political. She had maintained the independence and stability of England during a century of turbulence, fending off both domestic conspiracies and foreign ambitions. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 became a symbol of national resilience. a testament to the strategic genius and resolve of a monarch who ruled with both prudence and courage. England had emerged from her reign stronger militarily, with a navy that would become a cornerstone of its global influence in centuries to come. Elizabeth's influence extended deeply into the realm of religion. By carefully navigating the turbulent waters between Protestant and Catholic factions, she established a religious settlement that provided stability and unity, while avoiding the kind of civil war that had plagued neighboring nations. Her policies allowed Protestantism to flourish, while employing pragmatism to manage dissent. In doing so, she cemented a spiritual and cultural foundation for England that shaped its national character and international relations for generations. Culturally, the Elizabethan age reached its pinnacle under her patronage. Literature, theatre, and music thrived, reflecting both the sophistication of the court and the broader vitality of English society. Playwrights such as William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson produced works that captured the human condition in ways that transcended their era, blending history, morality, and imagination. Elizabeth's personal engagement with the arts, her knowledge of languages, her appreciation of literature, and her encouragement of scholars ensured that England became a centre of Renaissance culture, admired across Europe. Her image, immortalised in countless portraits, remained a powerful symbol of authority and identity. Pearls, jewels, ruffs, and embroidered gowns conveyed more than wealth or status. They projected sovereignty, wisdom, and permanence. Elizabeth understood the importance of perception. She had cultivated a persona that was both awe-inspiring and approachable, commanding loyalty and respect while fostering admiration. Even after death, her likeness continued to shape English culture, inspiring art, literature, and political imagery. Elizabeth's personal example as a female ruler also left an enduring mark. In a time when women rarely exercised sovereign power independently, she had ruled decisively, strategically, and effectively. Her success challenged prevailing gender norms, demonstrating that intelligence, courage, and wisdom could transcend societal expectations. Future generations of women, particularly those in positions of influence, would look to Elizabeth as a model of leadership, resilience, and self-determination. Diplomatically, Elizabeth's reign set new standards for strategic foresight and negotiation. She managed alliances, handled espionage networks, and navigated complex European politics with remarkable acumen. Her careful balance of firmness and diplomacy ensured that England retained its sovereignty and influence, even amid powerful continental forces. Figures such as Robert Cecil and Francis Walsingham, trained under her guidance, carried forward her principles of intelligence, discretion, and strategic planning, leaving a professional legacy that shaped English governance long after her passing. Elizabeth's enduring influence was also moral and symbolic. She embodied the unity of the nation, the authority of the crown, and the aspirations of a people. Her speeches inspired courage and loyalty. Her decisions safeguarded the realm. Her presence provided reassurance and stability. In every act, Elizabeth demonstrated that monarchy could be both pragmatic and principled, personal and public, ceremonial and strategic. Her reign became a template for effective leadership in a complex, often unpredictable world. The Elizabethan legacy also shaped England's global trajectory. Her naval victories and support for exploration laid the groundwork for the expansion of trade and colonial influence. Privateers such as Sir Francis Drake extended English reach into the Americas and beyond, while the foundation of a professional, disciplined navy allowed England to compete with continental powers for centuries to come. Elizabeth's vision of England as a resilient, sovereign, and ambitious nation would echo in the policies and endeavours of her successors, fueling both exploration and empire. Yet perhaps the most profound aspect of Elizabeth's legacy was the identity she forged for England. Under her guidance, the nation came to see itself as Protestant, independent, and capable of defying seemingly insurmountable odds. Cultural achievements, military triumphs, religious stability, and political acumen combined to define a distinct English character: proud, resilient, and forward-looking. Elizabeth had not merely ruled a kingdom, she had shaped a national consciousness, embedding values and aspirations that would endure for centuries. Even centuries later, Elizabeth remains a symbol of what leadership can achieve. Historians, writers, and artists continue to study her life, her decisions, and her persona, drawing lessons from her courage, intelligence, and unyielding commitment to her people. The monuments, portraits, literature, and legends that commemorate her reign are more than historical artifacts. They are enduring testaments to the impact of one extraordinary individual on the course of human history. Elizabeth's reign demonstrates the extraordinary intersection of personal resolve and historical circumstance. She navigated threats from foreign powers, religious schisms, courtly intrigue, and the constraints of gender with unmatched skill. Her victories, both military and cultural, were the result of intellect, foresight, and strategic patience. Her legacy, therefore, is not confined to a single achievement, but is woven into the very fabric of England, its identity, its culture, and its enduring sense of purpose. In the centuries that followed, Elizabeth would be remembered not only as the Virgin Queen, but as the architect of England, as Golden Age, the defender of Protestantism, the patron of culture, and a model of sovereign authority. She exemplified the rare combination of wisdom, courage, and vision that defines historical greatness. Through triumph and adversity, ceremony and council, solitude and public duty, Elizabeth I had shaped not only her own era, but the centuries to come, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire awe and admiration across the world. Elizabeth I's reign was not only a political triumph, but also a period of remarkable cultural flourishing, an era that would be remembered as the Elizabethan Age. This golden era reflected the Queen's patronage, intelligence, and vision, shaping English society in ways that would resonate for centuries. Under her guidance, England became a centre of literature, drama, music, and artistic achievement, creating a legacy that extended far beyond the battlefield or the council chamber. The court itself was a living canvas of culture. Elizabeth understood that her image, her speeches, and her ceremonies were instruments of both governance and inspiration. Audiences, masks, and royal progresses were staged with meticulous care, combining pageantry, music, dance, and visual spectacle. Courtiers were expected to participate with skill and decorum, learning etiquette, dance, and rhetoric to meet the Queen's exacting standards. These rituals reinforced social hierarchies, rewarded loyalty, and celebrated national identity, while simultaneously fostering an environment in which the arts could flourish. The theatre reached unprecedented heights during Elizabeth's reign. Playwrights such as William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, and Thomas Kyd explored history, tragedy, and human nature with sophistication and insight. Elizabeth herself was known to attend performances at the Globe and other playhouses, appreciating the intricate interplay of language, emotion, and spectacle. Drama became a mirror of Elizabethan society, reflecting the ambitions, conflicts, and aspirations of a nation navigating political intrigue, religious tension, and international diplomacy. Historical plays, in particular, resonated with Elizabeth's own experiences, portraying kings and queens, rebellion and loyalty, ambition and virtue in ways that mirrored her own life. Poetry and literature also flourished. Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queen, published during her reign, celebrated virtue, heroism, and the English identity, combining allegory with rich symbolism. Sonnets and lyrical poetry explored themes of love, loyalty, mortality, and governance, often reflecting the subtleties of courtly life and the moral expectations of the age. Elizabeth, herself a skilled linguist and reader, understood the power of words to shape perception, inspire loyalty, and cement legacy. Her court encouraged intellectual engagement, creating a vibrant culture in which literature, philosophy, and art were deeply intertwined with political life. Music played a vital role in the Elizabethan court and in wider society. Composers such as William Byrd and Thomas Tallis created sacred and secular compositions, blending intricate polyphony with expressive lyricism. Elizabeth's own participation in music, She played the virginal and sang, demonstrated her personal appreciation, and set a standard for her courtiers. Music accompanied state ceremonies, courtly entertainments, and private devotion, reinforcing both the grandeur of the monarchy and the cohesion of the realm. Visual arts, too, prospered under Elizabeth's reign. Portraiture, in particular, became a tool of statecraft. Artists like Nicholas Hilliard and Lavina Tearlink captured the Queen's likeness with extraordinary detail and symbolic depth. Every ruff, pearl, and embroidered gown conveyed authority, virtue, and continuity. Elizabeth's portraits were distributed widely, both within England and abroad, shaping perceptions of her power and reinforcing her image as the eternal commanding monarch. Symbolism in these works, the Tudor rose, the ermine, and the globe, communicated messages of legitimacy, strength, and divine favor. Elizabeth's patronage extended to architecture and urban development as well. Palaces such as Whitehall and Hampton Court were centers of ceremonial life and artistic innovation, adorned with tapestries, intricate woodwork, and magnificent gardens. Her progresses through the countryside brought courtly culture to towns and villages, stimulating local economies, inspiring local artisans, and reinforcing the presence of the monarchy. These tours allowed Elizabeth to connect with her subjects while showcasing the wealth, sophistication, and stability of her reign. The Elizabethan age was also marked by exploration and expansion. Inspired by both ambition and the Queen's support, explorers such as Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, and Humphrey Gilbert embarked on voyages across the Atlantic and to distant lands. These journeys expanded England's knowledge of the world, challenged Spain's dominance, and laid the foundations for future trade, colonization, and naval power. Elizabeth's encouragement of exploration reflected her strategic understanding of England's potential as a maritime nation and her vision for its long-term influence on global affairs. Education and intellectual inquiry thrived in Elizabethan England. Grammar schools, universities such as Oxford and Cambridge, and private tutoring systems cultivated knowledge in literature, mathematics, science, and classical studies. Elizabeth valued learning and scholarship, encouraging advisors and courtiers to cultivate intellect alongside loyalty. The proliferation of books, pamphlets, and treatises disseminated ideas widely, creating a literate and engaged population that supported the growth of culture and informed debate. Religion, art, and culture were intertwined. The Elizabethan religious settlement, while primarily political, also influenced artistic expression. Sacred music, iconography, and ceremonial practices reflected Protestant values, yet they did so with elegance, beauty, and a sense of continuity with England's historical identity. The Queen's careful management of these cultural and religious expressions ensured stability while allowing creativity to flourish. Elizabeth's personal engagement with culture also reinforced her political authority. By actively participating in courtly ceremonies, commissioning works of art, and encouraging literary and musical achievements, she positioned herself as the arbiter of taste, morality, and virtue. Her presence inspired artists, musicians, writers, and courtiers alike, creating a symbiotic relationship in which the brilliance of Elizabethan culture elevated her reign, while her authority ensured the flourishing of intellectual and artistic endeavors. The Elizabethan age, therefore, was more than a historical period. It was a reflection of the Queen herself. Its vibrancy, sophistication, and ambition mirrored her intellect, taste, and vision. The era's literature, theatre, music, art, and exploration were not merely products of circumstance, but deliberate expressions of a monarch's understanding that culture is inseparable from governance, identity, and legacy. Through her patronage and influence, Elizabeth I created a cultural renaissance that defined England, inspired the imagination of generations, and solidified her place as one of history's most remarkable sovereigns. Her reign demonstrated that leadership is not only the exercise of power, but the cultivation of beauty, intellect, and identity, that a nation's spirit can be elevated as much by poetry and music as by strategy and policy, and that a monarch's legacy endures most powerfully through the hearts, minds, and creativity of her people. Elizabeth I's reign had transformed England, leaving an indelible mark on politics, culture, and national identity. As she approached the final years of her life, her influence became as much symbolic as it was practical, and the Virgin Queen emerged as a living embodiment of England itself. She was more than a monarch. She was a legend in her own time, a figure whose presence, image, and decisions would resonate for centuries. Throughout her life, Elizabeth had mastered the art of perception. Every gesture, speech, and appearance at court or in public was calculated to project authority, wisdom, and majesty. Even in her later years, when the weight of decades showed in her face and body, she maintained the appearance of vigor and control. Portraits from this period, crafted with meticulous detail by artists such as Nicholas Hilliard, immortalized her image with symbolic adornments: pearls for purity, ermine for justice, roses for dynasty, and globes for global awareness. These images were not mere vanity. They were instruments of statecraft, communicating power, stability, and continuity to subjects and foreign courts alike. Elizabeth's influence extended beyond England. Across Europe, monarchs, diplomats, and intellectuals admired and feared her acumen. She had navigated a world of formidable rivals, balancing the interests of Spain, France, and the Holy Roman Empire, while maintaining Protestant England's independence. Her alliances, marriages she declined, and strategic diplomacy had ensured that England remained sovereign, respected, and increasingly powerful on the world stage. Even in death, foreign observers recognized her extraordinary skill and the unprecedented stability she had maintained in a century marked by upheaval. Within England, her symbolic presence inspired loyalty and pride. Citizens celebrated her victories, mourned her losses, and participated in the elaborate ceremonies that reinforced national unity. Masques, festivals, and public displays were imbued with the Queen's image and ideals, making the monarchy tangible in the daily lives of her people. She understood the importance of ceremony, spectacle, and culture not as distractions, but as vital instruments of governance. Her reign demonstrated that authority could be reinforced through art, music, theatre, and ritual, as much as through law, force, or diplomacy. Elizabeth's personal example as a ruler also became part of her enduring legacy. She had defied expectations, ruling as a woman in a male-dominated society with extraordinary skill, intelligence, and independence. Her decisions, though often solitary, reflected deep strategic insight and moral consideration. She faced conspiracies, rebellion, and assassination attempts with composure, demonstrating that courage, intellect, and restraint were inseparable from effective leadership. By embodying these qualities, she set a standard for rulers and citizens alike, teaching that resilience, wisdom, and foresight are essential to governance. The Virgin Queen's enduring solitude, paradoxically, became a source of strength. By remaining unmarried, she retained full authority and autonomy, avoiding the compromises marriage might have forced upon her reign. Her personal sacrifices, loneliness, unfulfilled desires, and constant vigilance highlighted the extraordinary demands placed upon a sovereign. Elizabeth's life illustrated the complex interplay between personal experience and public duty, showing that leadership often requires the suppression of private wishes for the greater good. Elizabeth's cultural patronage ensured that her influence would survive in ways beyond politics. The Elizabethan age was marked by remarkable achievements in literature, theatre, music, and exploration. Shakespeare, Marlowe, Spencer, and other luminaries created works that reflected the ambitions, virtues, and conflicts of the era, while Elizabeth's support provided the conditions for their flourishing. Exploration, supported by the Queen's endorsement, expanded England's knowledge of the world and laid the groundwork for future maritime and colonial endeavours. These cultural and intellectual achievements, inspired and protected by her rule, became integral to England's identity and international prestige. In governance, Elizabeth's prudence and strategy left an enduring institutional legacy. Her advisors, including Robert Cecil and William Knollys, had been trained in the art of intelligence, diplomacy, and administration, creating a professional network that would guide England through subsequent reigns. Religious settlement, economic stability, and naval power were maintained with foresight, ensuring continuity even as the Tudor dynasty concluded. Her careful management of succession, culminating in the peaceful accession of James VI of Scotland as James I of England, demonstrated her commitment to England's stability beyond her lifetime. Elizabeth's death on March 24, 1603, was both a historical and symbolic turning point. She passed without naming an heir, yet the transition to James III was remarkably smooth. The Tudor dynasty ended, but the foundations she had laid ensured the survival of a stable, prosperous, and confident England. Her death was mourned widely. The nation recognized that it had lost not merely a monarch, but a figure who had embodied its spirit, guided its destiny, and inspired its people. The legend of Elizabeth II continued to grow long after her passing. Historians, writers, artists, and dramatists celebrated her intelligence, courage, and independence. She became a symbol of the possibilities of female leadership, the importance of wisdom in governance, and the power of cultural patronage to shape national identity. Her reign, a unique combination of ceremony, diplomacy, military acumen, and personal resolve, became a standard against which future monarchs were measured. Even today, Elizabeth is remembered not only for her political achievements, but also for her ability to shape a nation's consciousness. She defined what it meant to be English in the Renaissance, balancing tradition with innovation, strength with compassion, and duty with personal sacrifice. Her legacy transcends time, demonstrating that history is shaped not only by events, but by the vision, intellect, and character of those who seize their moment with courage and wisdom. Elizabeth the Fair's life and reign were a testament to the extraordinary power of one human being to shape history, culture, and identity. Through triumph and adversity, solitude and public service, strategy and spectacle, she left a legacy that continues to inspire awe, admiration, and study. The Virgin Queen became immortal, not merely in portraits, literature, or legend, but in the enduring spirit of the nation she led, the cultural flowering she fostered, and the historical consciousness she indelibly shaped. The death of Elizabeth I in 1603 marked the end of the Tudor dynasty. Yet it was also the beginning of a new chapter in English history. James VI of Scotland, son of Mary Stuart, ascended the English throne as James I, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. This transition, largely peaceful, was a testament to Elizabeth's careful management of succession and her foresight in safeguarding England's stability. While the Tudor line ended, the foundations laid by Elizabeth ensured that the realm would continue to thrive under new leadership. Elizabeth's influence persisted in the early Stuart period. James I inherited a nation fortified by decades of strong governance, religious settlement, and international respect. The structures Elizabeth had built, administrative, legal, and military, allowed the new monarch to rule with a degree of stability that might have been impossible otherwise. Robert Cecil, Elizabeth's trusted advisor, played a crucial role in facilitating the succession, demonstrating the institutional continuity that Elizabeth had cultivated. Her careful grooming of capable ministers ensured that the machinery of state remained functional even after her passing. The Elizabethan age had transformed English culture, leaving an indelible mark on literature, theatre, and the arts. Shakespeare continued to write, producing works that reflected the moral, political, and social complexities of Elizabeth's reign, even as England entered the Stuart era. Poetry, music, and drama carried the intellectual vitality of the Elizabethan court forward, influencing generations of writers, composers, and thinkers. Elizabeth's patronage of the arts had not only elevated her court, but also created a national culture that transcended dynastic change. Religious life remained shaped by Elizabeth's settlement, even as James III sought to navigate his own path. The Church of England retained the Protestant framework that Elizabeth had established, though tensions with Puritans and Catholics continued. Elizabeth's careful balancing of enforcement and tolerance had prevented large-scale civil unrest, but underlying divisions remained a challenge for the Stuarts. Her policies had, however, created a precedent for pragmatic governance, acknowledging diversity while maintaining state authority that would guide English rulers in the years to come. Elizabeth's naval and military policies had left England prepared for future challenges. The defeat of the Spanish Armada had demonstrated the importance of maritime power, and the navy she had fostered became a cornerstone of England's growing global influence. Under James I, this naval foundation enabled England to expand its reach, establishing trade networks, colonies, and a presence on the international stage. Elizabeth's foresight in investing in defense and exploration had ensured that England could project power and protect its interests long after her reign. The symbolic and political power of Elizabeth's image continued to influence both court and country. She had become an archetype of sovereign authority, combining personal virtue, strategic acumen, and cultural sophistication. Monarchs, courtiers, and citizens alike looked to her example for guidance, and Elizabeth's portraits, speeches, and writings remained central to the public imagination. Even as the Stuart dynasty asserted its authority, the Virgin Queen's legacy loomed large, shaping expectations for leadership, decorum, and the exercise of power. Elizabeth's legacy also shaped national identity. During her reign, England had come to see itself as independent, resilient, and confident, a Protestant nation capable of standing against powerful adversaries. Her victories, particularly against Spain, inspired pride and fostered a sense of unity that transcended social class. Elizabeth's court and patronage had cultivated a culture of intellectual and artistic achievement, reinforcing the idea that England was not only politically strong, but also culturally sophisticated. This dual legacy of strength and refinement became central to England's self-perception for generations. Education and scholarship, encouraged by Elizabeth, continued to flourish into the Stuart era. Grammar schools, universities, and private tutoring systems cultivated knowledge and literacy among the elite, while the printing press enabled ideas to circulate more widely. Elizabeth's personal engagement with learning and the arts had set a standard for intellectual curiosity and cultural refinement. Her reign demonstrated that governance could be enriched by intellect, that a monarch could inspire both civic responsibility and artistic excellence, and that education was integral to national strength. Exploration and maritime enterprise, hallmarks of the Elizabethan era, continued under James I, building upon the achievements of Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, and other adventurers who had flourished during Elizabeth's reign. The knowledge, experience, and inspiration she provided created a framework for English expansion into the New World, the establishment of colonies, and the development of global trade. Elizabeth had nurtured a vision of England as a maritime power, and that vision guided her successors in the centuries to come. Elizabeth's ability to maintain national cohesion, manage succession prudently, and cultivate cultural excellence left an enduring imprint on English political and social life. The Tudor dynasty's achievements, symbolized by her reign, created stability in an era of potential fragmentation. Her strategic balance of authority, diplomacy, and symbolism ensured that England could transition to a new dynasty without descending into civil war or chaos, a remarkable accomplishment that set a precedent for responsible governance. Ultimately, the Elizabethan age, Elizabeth's reign, became a benchmark against which all future rulers of England were measured. It demonstrated the power of leadership grounded in intelligence, prudence, and cultural engagement. It showed that sovereignty required more than force. It demanded vision, patience, and the ability to inspire loyalty and respect. Elizabeth I had forged a legacy that encompassed politics, religion, culture, exploration, and national identity, leaving England prepared for both continuity and transformation under the Stuart monarchy. Her life and reign continue to resonate because they exemplify the extraordinary capacity of a single individual to shape the course of a nation. Elizabeth had turned adversity into opportunity, challenges into triumph, and personal sacrifices into public service. She left a world profoundly changed by her intellect, courage, and vision. As England moved into the Stuart era, the foundations she had laid ensured that her influence would endure, echoing in the political, cultural, and social developments of centuries to come. Elizabeth's reign did more than secure England politically and militarily. It created a legend that would endure for centuries. Known as the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth cultivated an image that transcended mere authority, embedding herself in the national consciousness as a symbol of England's resilience, virtue, and exceptional destiny. Her life became a narrative of drama, intelligence, and carefully orchestrated public persona, one that historians, artists, and storytellers have continued to explore and reinterpret across generations. From the earliest years of her rule, Elizabeth understood the power of image. Her decision to remain unmarried, despite the persistent pressures of dynastic marriage, was as much a political maneuver as a personal choice. By remaining the Virgin Queen, she retained ultimate authority, avoided factional disputes over her spouse's influence, and projected a form of sovereign purity that inspired both awe and loyalty. The symbolism of chastity, combined with her cultivated majesty, elevated her beyond ordinary rulers, presenting Elizabeth as England itself, unified, independent, and divinely favored. Elizabeth's persona was carefully reinforced through ceremony, spectacle, and art. State occasions, royal progresses, and court entertainments were orchestrated to project authority and inspire devotion. Every public appearance was an exercise in political theatre. Jewels, gowns, ruffs, and intricate embroidery conveyed messages of power, virtue, and continuity. Even subtle gestures, the tilt of her head, the gaze from her portraits, were laden with meaning. Artists such as Nicholas Hilliard captured this symbolism, creating images that presented the Queen as both approachable and sublime, human, yet idealized. These portraits were not just representations. They were instruments of governance and propaganda, ensuring that her image permeated the realm and beyond. The legend of Elizabeth was further amplified by the narratives surrounding her life and reign. Tales of her wit, intelligence, and courage circulated widely, reaching both courtiers and common people. Stories of her diplomatic skill, her handling of plots and conspiracies, and her triumph over the Spanish Armada contributed to an image of a monarch who was both brilliant and resilient. These narratives, often embellished but rooted in fact, transformed her from a ruler into an enduring symbol of England's exceptionalism. Elizabeth's dramatic encounters with figures such as Mary, Queen of Scots, enhanced the aura of intrigue and moral resolve surrounding her reign. The complex relationship between the two queens, family, rival, and political adversary, has fascinated historians and writers alike. Elizabeth's careful management of Mary's imprisonment, the delicate balance of justice and political necessity, and her ultimate decision to authorize Mary's execution were emblematic of her strategic acumen. In these moments, Elizabeth's persona as a sovereign who could act decisively yet remain measured was reinforced, deepening her mythos. The Virgin Queen persona was not merely a personal brand. It became a tool of national identity. Elizabeth's chastity symbolized the independence of the nation. By linking her own person to England itself, she created a powerful sense of unity. Citizens came to see the monarchy as inseparable from national destiny. England's sovereignty, culture, and moral authority were embodied in their queen. Festivals, poems, and songs celebrated her virtues, reinforcing the connection between the monarch and the people. Elizabeth had not only governed a nation, but had crafted an enduring narrative in which her reign and the country's identity were inseparably intertwined. Literature and drama further immortalized her image. Playwrights incorporated her qualities into historical dramas and allegorical works. Figures in poetry were often inspired by her wit, intelligence, and moral authority. Spenser's The Fairy Queen allegorized Elizabeth's virtues, portraying the Queen as a figure of justice, courage, and national unity. The dramatists of the Elizabethan stage, including Shakespeare, explored themes of sovereignty, duty, and virtue in ways that reflected both her reign and the moral ideals she embodied. Through these cultural productions, Elizabeth's legend became part of the intellectual and emotional life of England, shaping collective memory for generations. Her life was also imbued with symbolic and spiritual significance. Elizabeth often portrayed herself as God's chosen ruler, the rightful heir to England's legacy, and the protector of her people's welfare. Her speeches and writings conveyed moral authority, combining piety with political insight. This spiritual dimension reinforced her public image. Elizabeth was not merely a monarch, but a divinely sanctioned figure whose life and decisions carried moral weight. The Virgin Queen became a symbol of divine favor, moral virtue, and the national destiny of England, a synthesis of personal character and historical circumstance. Elizabeth's legend was further strengthened by the dramatic tension inherent in her life. Assassination plots, threats from foreign powers, religious conspiracies, and courtly intrigue created a narrative rich in suspense and human drama. Every triumph, whether naval victory, diplomatic success, or the thwarting of rebellion, reinforced her image as a resilient and cunning leader. Her ability to maintain authority in the face of danger enhanced her aura, transforming historical events into enduring stories of courage and wisdom. Even centuries later, Elizabeth I's story continues to captivate historians, artists, and audiences alike. Her reign is studied not only for its political and military achievements, but also for its symbolic resonance, cultural influence, and moral dimensions. She represents the convergence of intellect, courage, and artistry in leadership, illustrating how a single individual can shape a nation's identity and destiny. The Virgin Queen's legend remains a touchstone for understanding the possibilities and challenges of sovereignty, particularly for women in positions of power. Elizabeth I's enduring legacy is thus both concrete and mythic. She preserved England, strengthened its culture, and navigated a world of unprecedented challenges with skill and vision. Simultaneously, she crafted a persona that transcended mortality, embedding herself in the collective imagination as a symbol of national pride, moral authority, and feminine strength. The Virgin Queen became timeless, a figure whose life exemplifies the intricate interplay of human character, historical circumstance, and the power of legend. Elizabeth I's reign left a reverberating impact that extended far beyond her lifetime, shaping not only the immediate political landscape, but also the cultural, intellectual, and national trajectory of England. The policies she enacted, the culture she cultivated, and the persona she perfected created a framework for a nation that would navigate the turbulent decades of the 17th century and beyond. Her influence was felt in government, literature, religion, exploration, and identity, forming a legacy whose echoes resonate even in the modern era. In politics, Elizabeth's prudence and strategic foresight became a template for governance. Her careful balance of authority, diplomacy, and restraint illustrated how a monarch could command respect without relying solely on coercion. Successive rulers, including James I and Charles I, inherited institutions and administrative practices refined under Elizabeth's guidance. Advisors trained in intelligence, diplomacy, and policy implementation carried forward her emphasis on professional, competent governance. Elizabeth's reign demonstrated that stability was achievable not merely through force, but through a sophisticated combination of perception, law, and political acumen, a lesson that influenced English political thought for generations. Religious life, too, was deeply shaped by Elizabeth. The Elizabethan religious settlement, though imperfect, provided a foundation of Protestant stability, blending enforcement with pragmatic tolerance. While tensions with Catholics and Puritans persisted into the Stuart era, the framework she established allowed England to avoid the extremes of religious civil war that devastated other European nations. Elizabeth's careful cultivation of a moderate national Church of England created a religious identity intertwined with Englishness itself. This settlement not only guided spiritual life, but reinforced political unity, demonstrating how religion could be leveraged to foster national cohesion and legitimacy. Elizabeth's cultural influence endured across the centuries. The Elizabethan age became a benchmark of artistic, literary, and intellectual achievement, inspiring successive generations of writers, musicians, and artists. Shakespeare's plays, though often performed after her death, reflected the themes, human psychology, and social dynamics that had flourished under her patronage. The theatre, poetry, and music cultivated during her reign continued to shape English literature and identity, creating an enduring tradition that positioned England as a cultural powerhouse. Her emphasis on learning and scholarship, encouraging humanist education, intellectual curiosity, and the arts, fostered a climate of creativity whose echoes reached far into the 17th and 18th centuries. Exploration and maritime enterprise, hallmarks of Elizabeth's reign, carried forward into global significance. English voyages to the Americas, the Caribbean, and the Far East expanded trade networks and laid the groundwork for future colonial endeavours. Elizabeth's encouragement of privateers like Sir Francis Drake and her sponsorship of exploratory missions signalled England's ambitions as a maritime power. The navigation, trade, and naval strength cultivated during her reign provided the foundation for England's later dominance on the seas, influencing geopolitics, commerce, and cultural exchange for centuries. Elizabeth's persona as the Virgin Queen also left lasting symbolic and cultural impressions. Her image became a touchstone for national pride, feminine authority, and sovereign virtue. She embodied an ideal of leadership that fused intellect, courage, and moral authority. Literature, poetry, and drama often referenced her reign as a time of moral and cultural refinement, portraying Elizabeth as the archetype of wisdom and virtue in both historical and allegorical narratives. Her example influenced how English society conceptualized the monarchy, governance, and female leadership for generations. Internationally, Elizabeth's diplomacy and reputation shaped England's relationships with Europe. Her careful navigation of alliances, treaties, and marriages, both her own decisions and the marriages of her relatives, ensured that England maintained independence, avoided domination by larger powers, and gained prestige abroad. Even after her death, Elizabeth's reign was remembered in continental politics as an example of a small nation asserting itself successfully through strategy, negotiation, and cultural influence. Her diplomatic achievements underscored the potential of soft power, cultural, symbolic, and intellectual, alongside military and economic strength. The intellectual currents of the Elizabethan age, encouraged by Elizabeth's court, continue to influence English thought. Her patronage of scholars, philosophers, and scientists fostered inquiry and critical thinking. The proliferation of printing and literacy during her reign allowed ideas to circulate widely, planting seeds for the scientific, political, and philosophical developments that would define the early modern period. Elizabeth's commitment to learning, combined with her engagement in international diplomacy, exemplified the Renaissance ideal of a monarch who governed with both wisdom and curiosity. Even centuries later, Elizabeth's reign serves as a reference point in historical study, literature, and popular imagination. The combination of political acumen, cultural patronage, military success, and symbolic authority has been analyzed, dramatized, and celebrated across media. Historians study her strategies and policies, writers fictionalize her persona in novels and plays, and artists immortalize her likeness. She remains a model of how individual vision, intellect, and leadership can shape the course of a nation, creating a legacy that endures far beyond the temporal bounds of any one reign. Elizabeth's influence also helped forge a distinct sense of English national identity. Her victories, both symbolic and real, cultivated pride in independence, maritime strength, and Protestant resilience. Cultural achievements under her reign, drama, poetry, music, and art, reinforced a sense of shared values and historical continuity. Elizabeth had molded not only a state, but also a collective consciousness, embedding ideals of courage, virtue, and intellectual ambition into the nation's self-perception. These ideals would guide England through civil conflict, colonial expansion, and imperial ambition, demonstrating the lasting power of a sovereign's vision. The Elizabethan legacy also exemplifies the interplay between personal character and historical circumstance. Elizabeth's intellect, courage, and strategic insight allowed her to navigate the perils of her time, transforming challenges into opportunities. Her careful cultivation of image, culture, and governance created stability in an era of uncertainty. The institutions, arts, and national identity she fostered endured because they were not accidental. They were the product of deliberate, intelligent, and visionary leadership. Her reign illustrates how the qualities of one extraordinary individual can resonate through history, shaping societies and inspiring generations. In every dimension, political, cultural, religious, maritime, and symbolic, Elizabeth I's reign left echoes that shaped the future of England and influenced the wider world. Her legacy demonstrates the profound impact of leadership that combines intellect, vision, moral authority, and cultural sensitivity. The lessons of her reign, resilience in adversity, strategic foresight, and the power of symbolism continue to be studied and admired. Elizabeth's life was a nexus of history, culture, and identity, a testament to the enduring influence of a ruler who understood that the true measure of power lies not only in command, but in the shaping of a nation's spirit and destiny. Elizabeth I's reign stands as one of history's most remarkable demonstrations of personal leadership shaping the destiny of a nation. Beyond the battles won, treaties negotiated, or policies enacted, her enduring strength lay in her character. Her intellect, resilience, strategic acumen, and ability to inspire loyalty and admiration. To understand Elizabeth fully is to recognize how the personal and the political intertwined, creating a model of governance that continues to fascinate historians and leaders alike. From her earliest years, Elizabeth displayed extraordinary intelligence and curiosity. Fluent in multiple languages, well-versed in classical literature, and trained in rhetoric and diplomacy, she possessed a mind capable of navigating the complex social, religious, and political landscapes of Tudor England. Her education, carefully cultivated under tutors such as Roger Ascham, provided her not only with knowledge, but with analytical skills and insight into human behavior. Elizabeth learned to read intentions, anticipate threats, and respond with a blend of caution and decisiveness, a combination that would define her rule. Courage and resilience were hallmarks of Elizabeth's personal and political character. She faced challenges from the moment she became queen. Religious division threatened national stability. Foreign powers sought to undermine her authority, and domestic plots challenged her legitimacy. Yet she confronted each obstacle with a balance of prudence and audacity. The Spanish Armada, perhaps the most celebrated test of her leadership, showcased her capacity to inspire confidence in her commanders and subjects alike. Her calm presence, strategic foresight, and eloquent encouragement fortified the nation's resolve, turning a potential catastrophe into a defining triumph. Elizabeth's ability to maintain authority in a male-dominated society is a testament to her political genius. She understood that perception was as vital as action, crafting an image of sovereign majesty that commanded respect. Her deliberate choice to remain unmarried allowed her to exercise full authority, free from the influence or interference of a husband. By presenting herself as the Virgin Queen, she transformed personal decision into political advantage, blending gender, virtue, and sovereignty into a symbol of national strength. Her authority was never assumed lightly. It was cultivated through intelligence, ceremony, diplomacy, and careful orchestration of public persona. Strategic acumen extended to her relationships with ministers and advisors. Elizabeth surrounded herself with capable men and women, cultivating loyalty while maintaining ultimate control. Figures such as William Cecil, Robert Dudley, and Francis Walsingham provided expertise in diplomacy, espionage, and administration. Yet Elizabeth ensured that no single advisor could dominate her decisions. Her skill lay in integrating counsel, weighing options, and asserting her own judgment, combining collaboration with absolute responsibility. She demonstrated that effective leadership requires both delegation and personal accountability, a balance rarely achieved in any era. Elizabeth's personal qualities also included wit, charm, and emotional intelligence. She could disarm opponents with conversation, charm courtiers with humor, and inspire devotion through eloquence. Her speeches, both formal and informal, revealed a keen understanding of rhetoric and human psychology. Whether addressing troops, ambassadors, or her people, Elizabeth conveyed authority without alienating, inspiring confidence without arrogance. Her mastery of communication reinforced her political power and created a legacy in which words, as much as actions, shaped history. Her leadership style combined prudence with decisiveness. Elizabeth rarely acted impulsively. She weighed options, anticipated consequences, and balanced competing interests. Yet when action was required, she acted with clarity and resolve. The handling of Mary, Queen of Scots, exemplifies this approach. Elizabeth navigated the moral, political, and dynastic complexities of Mary's presence with careful calculation, ultimately authorizing her execution when national security demanded it. This episode illustrates Elizabeth's ability to reconcile personal conscience, political necessity, and public perception, a defining feature of her reign. Elizabeth's resilience was also deeply personal. She endured loneliness, threats, betrayals, and the constant burden of expectation. Her life was shaped by isolation imposed by circumstances, political necessity, and personal choices. Yet she transformed these challenges into sources of strength, cultivating independence, fortitude, and self-reliance. Her ability to endure adversity, maintain composure, and act with strategic clarity demonstrates that leadership is inseparable from personal character and inner resolve. The Virgin Queen's legacy as a model of governance rests not only on her accomplishments but on the principles she exemplified: intelligence, prudence, courage, strategic vision, moral authority, and cultural engagement. She demonstrated that a ruler's influence extends beyond policy and conquest. It is forged in the cultivation of respect, the shaping of perception, and the integration of personal virtues into public life. Elizabeth's reign illustrates that leadership is both art and science, requiring intellect, empathy, courage, and vision in equal measure. Elizabeth's example inspired future monarchs and leaders, both in England and abroad. Her ability to maintain national stability, manage succession prudently, and cultivate cultural achievement set standards for effective leadership. Her personal qualities, intelligence, resilience, charisma, and moral authority, remained touchstones for rulers navigating complex political landscapes. In a world where power often depended on force or inheritance, Elizabeth demonstrated that wisdom, strategy, and personal integrity could define an era, shape a nation, and create a legacy that transcends time. In reflecting upon Elizabeth's life, one recognizes the profound interplay between individual character and historical circumstance. Her intellect allowed her to understand the world she inherited. Her courage allowed her to shape it. Her vision allowed her to leave it transformed. The Tudor realm she governed became a foundation for modern England, a nation defined not only by its institutions and military prowess, but by its culture, identity, and sense of purpose. Elizabeth I remains a benchmark of leadership, a model of resilience and strategic brilliance, and a figure whose life continues to inspire admiration, study, and wonder. Elizabeth II's life and reign closed a remarkable chapter in English history, yet her influence continued far beyond her passing. She had transformed England into a nation of resilience, cultural achievement, and political sophistication. Her reign, marked by courage, intellect, and strategic brilliance, became a defining period in world history, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire scholars, artists, leaders, and ordinary citizens alike. Elizabeth's death on March 24, 1603, ended the Tudor dynasty. Yet the stability she had fostered ensured a peaceful transition to the Stuart line with James I. This continuity was a testament to her foresight and careful governance. She had managed succession with prudence, balancing the interests of powerful nobles, foreign courts, and religious factions to prevent civil unrest. Her ability to safeguard England's future, even in her absence, demonstrated a deep understanding of political responsibility and the long-term consequences of leadership. Her symbolic presence endured long after her physical life ended. Portraits, poems, plays, and songs celebrated her virtues, intelligence, and majesty. She became a cultural icon, the embodiment of England's identity, independence, and Protestant resolve. The image of the Virgin Queen, pure, wise, commanding, and unyielding, became inseparable from the concept of national strength. Elizabeth's life illustrated how a monarch could transcend mere governance to become a symbol of collective pride and aspiration. Elizabeth's personal qualities, intelligence, resilience, courage, and strategic acumen, formed the foundation of her enduring influence. She had navigated religious divisions, conspiracies, foreign threats, and domestic politics with remarkable skill. Her ability to maintain authority as a woman in a male-dominated society inspired admiration and set a precedent for female leadership. By embodying wisdom, moral authority, and independence, she challenged contemporary norms and expanded the possibilities for sovereign governance. Her life continues to serve as a model for leadership, demonstrating the impact of intellect, foresight, and personal integrity. The cultural flourishing of Elizabeth's reign also left an indelible mark. Literature, theatre, music, and the visual arts thrived under her patronage, creating a vibrant intellectual and artistic environment. Figures such as Shakespeare, Marlowe, Spencer, and Hilliard developed their craft in an era of encouragement and creative freedom. The Elizabethan age became synonymous with artistic and literary excellence, establishing traditions that would shape English culture for centuries. Elizabeth's support for exploration and scholarship further extended her influence, fostering a sense of curiosity, ambition, and global awareness that defined the nation's character. Elizabeth's naval and military initiatives laid the groundwork for England's future maritime dominance. The defeat of the Spanish Armada demonstrated the strategic value of a strong navy, innovative tactics, and national unity. These achievements inspired confidence in England's capacity to project power and protect its interests abroad. Her vision for exploration and maritime enterprise catalyzed trade, colonization, and international influence, setting the stage for England's eventual global reach. In these ways, Elizabeth not only shaped her own era, but also influenced the centuries that followed. The personal drama of Elizabeth's life, her relationships, rivalries, and moral choices, added depth to her historical legacy. Her handling of Mary, Queen of Scots, illustrates the complexity of her judgment, balancing family ties, political necessity, and moral responsibility in a matter of national security. Her deliberate choice to remain unmarried preserved her authority and allowed her to act independently, a decision that symbolized her sovereignty and reinforced her image as the Virgin Queen. These personal choices, woven into the fabric of political life, created a narrative of courage, wisdom, and calculated resolve. Elizabeth's reign also contributed to the development of national identity. Her victories, domestic stability, and cultural patronage fostered a sense of pride and unity. Citizens came to see themselves as part of a nation defined by resilience, intelligence, and creativity. Elizabeth had shaped not only political institutions, but also collective consciousness. The idea that England was independent, culturally sophisticated, and morally righteous became inseparable from her reign, embedding a lasting legacy in the nation's character. Her enduring legend was amplified by the stories told about her life. Elizabeth became a symbol in literature, drama, and art, embodying wisdom, courage, and feminine authority. Playwrights dramatized her decisions and personality. Poets praised her virtues, and historians chronicled her achievements. These cultural representations reinforced her status as a figure larger than life, a sovereign whose impact transcended the political and temporal, reaching into the realms of imagination, aspiration, and moral ideal. Elizabeth's life exemplifies the convergence of personal excellence and historical circumstance. Her intellect, courage, and vision allowed her to navigate the perils of a volatile era, while her foresight ensured the stability and continuity of England after her death. Her ability to integrate strategy, diplomacy, culture, and symbolism into her rule created a multifaceted legacy. She was a monarch of deeds and image, of substance and symbol, whose reign became a benchmark for leadership, statecraft, and national identity. Ultimately, Elizabeth I remains immortal not only in history books, but in the cultural consciousness of England and the world. She demonstrated that leadership requires more than authority. It demands intellect, courage, foresight, and the ability to inspire devotion and loyalty. Her life was a testament to the power of a single individual to shape a nation's destiny, influence global politics, and create enduring cultural achievement. The Virgin Queen story is one of triumph, resilience, and vision, a legacy that continues to illuminate the human capacity for greatness, strategy, and enduring influence. As centuries passed, Elizabeth's image became a symbol of national pride, female authority, and cultural excellence. Her life, achievements, and persona continue to captivate audiences, scholars, and storytellers, serving as a reminder that history is shaped not only by events, but by the character, vision, and courage of those who inhabit it. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, remains a figure whose influence transcends time, embodying the power of intellect, strategy, and enduring leadership in the annals of history.